I just wrote my name on the enlistment form. But it shocked the entire high level of Azura country. Even the elite troops were fully armed and went into combat readiness. However, I remained calm. This left my classmates astonished. What heinous crime had this guy committed? Why did it mobilize so many elite troops? The next second, dozens of dark gun barrels were aimed at my head. Put down your bag and come with us. Beside me, Arya Steele excitedly recorded everything. Thousands of elite special forces showing up at school to arrest someone was unheard of. Soon, I was taken to the interrogation room, where I sat calmly in the chair. Director Richard looked at me sternly. Ethan Quinn, what did you do this summer? I pondered for a moment but didn't reply, and soon, I fell asleep. Director Richard walked over and woke me up. We received news. Recently, someone named Reborn has risen to 8th place in the international mercenary rankings. Every update of the international mercenary rankings attracts global attention. I propped my chin with my hand and closed my eyes peacefully. This angered quite a few policemen. Commissioner Charles, with a deep look in his eyes, said, "Ethan Quinn, please cooperate with us." Hearing this, I slowly opened my eyes. Do you have any evidence that what you're saying is related to me? Director Richard casually threw a file folder at me. As a citizen of Azura country, why are you working as a mercenary abroad? I crooked my finger. Naturally, I'm doing it to make money. Director Richard was furious and even wanted to drag me out and shoot me. Suddenly, I thought of today's recruitment. In my situation, can I still join the Azura country army? Director Richard's mouth twitched. You want to join the army? That depends on whether you cooperate with us. I thought, haven't I cooperated well enough? Director Richard continued to ask, tell us what you did this summer. Without thinking, I directly said, helped an organization retrieve a satellite chip. Sent back a gang leader, helped someone recover confidential documents. Also assisted in rescuing compatriots overseas, and incidentally dismantled a human trafficking organization. The surroundings were so quiet that it felt like the air was sucked out, everyone was staring at me in shock. After a moment, a man clapped his hands. Do you believe what you're saying? Don't think you can brag just because you're the 8th ranked mercenary. You asked me to tell the truth, and I did, but you don't believe it. Tell me, do you have any accomplices? I calmly said, in this world, one person is enough. Director Richard's face darkened, still not believing my words. According to the analysis above, Reborn is very likely a team. Seeing he couldn't get anything out of me, Director Richard left. The interrogator continued to press me. A few days ago, the crime boss in the Cotton Triangle died tragically. Was it related to you? I honestly shook my head. I didn't do it. His subordinates betrayed him. At most, I just facilitated the situation. The interrogator harshly questioned, so you're saying you did a good deed? Helping them unite internally? Of course. I even made a gentleman's agreement with them not to extend the distribution of white powder into Azura country. Shouldn't you be thanking me? The interrogator said sarcastically, thank you, we'll make you a banner tomorrow. At this moment, Director Richard returned to the interrogation room, his demeanor evidently much softer. A month ago, when our special forces encountered an accident, an international mercenary provided us with a helicopter. Was that you? I propped my chin and thought for a few seconds. Oh, that time? It was just in passing. We are all from Azura country and couldn't just watch them die. Director Richard confirmed repeatedly if that person was really me. I glanced sideways. For Special Forces soldiers in yellow training uniforms, location in Manhua Inland, Tegaster Harbor. Director Richard's face changed dramatically. Who exactly are you? I lazily replied, a junior at Coastal University, Ethan Quinn. Commissioner Charles looked grave, really tough to deal with. He sighed helplessly and had to let me go but kept an eye on me secretly. Stretched and took my book and the enlistment form, didn't crumple it, right? The interrogator said irritably, no. At this time, Arya Steele from the journalism department, who was squatting and waiting, saw me coming out and immediately opened the video and rushed over. Classmate, why did so many special police officers come for you? What happened? I didn't intend to answer and took out my phone with a cracked screen to book a ride back to school. After returning to school, many classmates gathered curiously. Ethan, why did you come back so quickly? Are you really a spy? I calmly put down my backpack, it was a misunderstanding. They caught the wrong person. Impossible, with such a big scene. I gave them an indifferent glance, then why would I come back? The classmates were speechless. At this time, I didn't know that I had become the focus of the entire internet. As soon as I went out, 2 girls with mobile phones started recording me from a distance. When I arrived at the recruitment office, I handed my completed application form to Director Stephen. Director Stephen took my form and placed it separately on a table. You can sign up, but you need to be prepared. I nodded slightly and left. The next morning, as soon as I walked into the classroom, I sensed something was off. The usually sparsely populated classroom was now packed. Everyone was looking at me with suspicious eyes, and some were even recording with their phones. As soon as I sat down, I fell asleep. Suddenly, the old professor knocked on the blackboard. "Ethan is still sleeping. Get up and answer this question." My deskmate David Hale immediately nudged me with his elbow. I got up skillfully, half asleep, looking at the question on the blackboard. At this time, the surrounding onlookers started whispering, "If he can answer that question, it would be a miracle." In my half-dream state, I gave a 10-minute answer. The old professor nodded repeatedly, "Very good. The conclusion is accurate. But I still need to criticize you, don't always sleep in one position, it's easy to get a stiff neck, especially near the window where you can catch a cold." Everyone looked speechless. "He doesn't even listen in class, and you're still concerned about him?" At this time, the kind professor invited me to join his experimental project and extended 2 fingers. The classmates immediately muttered, $2,000 isn't much, but it's enough for a college student. David sighed and said, "You all missed a zero." Everyone's expressions froze. How is this fair? We work so hard, yet we can't compare to this guy who sleeps every day. I smiled and declined, "Professor, I appreciate your kindness, but I usually like to wander freely. The lab isn't suitable for me." At night, I arrived at the internet cafe for my part-time job. The guy at the counter saw me and handed over a toolbox. "Ethan, check the computers at stations 12 and 132, they keep blacking out." I took the tools and fixed everything in half an hour. I sat in a corner and entered a website, then plugged in a hard drive. A bunch of numerical gibberish appeared on the screen. A few minutes later, an interface similar to a communication software appeared. Having not logged in for a few days, there were more than 40 people looking for me to carry out tasks. One message caught my attention. "Eliminate the Valoran scam group, with a commission of 5 million. Considering that the victims were all from Azura country. I quickly replied, "I can do it, but I need something extra." The other party replied instantly, "What do you want?" "I also want 80% of the scam group's funds." After a moment of silence, they replied, "Your demand is too high. The higher-ups do not agree." I typed again, "I can guarantee the complete elimination of the core members, but others can't guarantee that. Because Reborn has never failed in any mission." After considering for a while, they agreed but required me to act quickly. I directly replied, "I accept the mission." The other party was stunned for a while before replying, "All right, we'll do as you say." For the next few days, I worked 2 or 3 part-time jobs daily, busy until midnight, either making milk tea in a tea shop or mopping floors at a gym. Gradually, the netizens' attention to me faded. For the next few days, I worked 2 or 3 part-time jobs daily, busy until midnight, either making milk tea in a tea shop or mopping floors at a gym. Gradually, the netizens' attention to me faded. At this time, I received a call from the recruitment office. The physical examination for enlistment was set for October 5th. It seemed the plan needed to be revised. I needed to complete the new part-time task by the 3rd and return on the 4th. After changing several cars, I arrived at an unfinished building. I went straight to the basement and walked to a wall, took out a card, and placed it on a certain brick. 2 beeps sounded. An elevator seemingly appeared out of nowhere. There were 4 floors inside, and I pressed the button for the 3rd floor. The moment the door opened, it felt like entering the Matrix. Dozens of monitors, various instruments of different sizes and models, and the central computer continuously updated the international dark web transactions. After a quick glance, I went to the 2nd floor to pack the weapons for this operation. At 2 o'clock in the morning, I drove away in a black Jeep. Meanwhile, the 2 undercover police officers monitoring me followed the location to the dormitory, only to find it empty. A phone was left powered off in the cabinet. They thought, "Damn, this guy has gone to be a mercenary again?" They immediately called Director Richard. "Sir, he's gone." Director Richard quickly contacted National Security Bureau Chief Charles. "Do you have any leads on Reborn?" Chief Charles sighed, "We've done our best, but we haven't tracked him down yet." The next day, I was sitting on a speedboat across the ocean. The person steering was Butler, an old friend. At this time, I logged into my account and informed the other party of the latest operation time. A red locator began flashing on the Domestic Public Security Bureau's computer. Reborn was online. Director Richard nervously asked, "Where's the location?" After multiple layers of decryption, they locked my position at the Valoran border, indicating that a battle was imminent there. Patrick, a director at the National Security Bureau, and the Public Security Bureau officials gathered. "What's he doing there? Another gang conflict?" Report, Reborn's account just withdrew a huge sum of money. After multiple verifications, it was from one of Valoran's scam group accounts. Before they could understand the connection, Reborn's account received an equivalent large sum. At this time, I was following the transaction path to hack into the opponent's IP and plant a virus, causing their system to completely collapse. Then I jumped into the vast sea. Butler saw this and murmured, still 5 or 6 nautical miles from the shore? Ethan, this madman swam there, he's a monster. Appearing in Valoran, I had already single-handedly wreaked havoc on the fraud syndicate, causing their network systems to crash. Several key office buildings were blown up. The fraud syndicate's dozens of mercenaries and thugs hadn't even caught a glimpse of me. 3 years ago, I had bonded with a system that rewarded me with skills for completing tasks. Completing 1,000 push-ups earned me the sharpshooter skill. As my skills accumulated, my abilities grew stronger. Starting with petty theft tasks, I had climbed to the 8th rank on the mercenary leaderboard. Now, with dozens of skills, I dared to take on an entire city alone. Explosions echoed within the Marlowe Fraud Syndicate's headquarters. Suddenly, the bodyguard next to the syndicate boss staggered and collapsed. The boss, clutching a briefcase, cowered and looked around. Who? Let's talk. I can give you money. Another bodyguard, with blood spreading across his chest, fell at the boss's feet. I appeared before the boss, dressed in my self-designed bulletproof vest and helmet. You knew this would happen. Why did you get involved in the first place? The boss collapsed in fear. You're the mercenary Reborn? Although he didn't recognize Reborn, the outfit was unmistakable. The boss trembled, kowtowing frantically. Please spare me. I'll give you all the money. I coldly stared at him. In your eyes, is human life just a number? I kicked him hard. With a thud, the man stared in terror, his body slumped to the side. Save your repentance for the afterlife. After dealing with the boss, I took out my phone and snapped a few photos of him from different angles. Then I walked boldly into the office and refunded the syndicate's fraud money from the past 3 years to the victims. 3 days later, all members of the fraud syndicate, either in bandages or on crutches, 100 or so people, stood disheveled in the square. I stood on a car roof, holding a megaphone. Have you realized your mistakes over these past few days? The crowd shouted in unison. We were wrong. We won't engage in fraud anymore. I continued. I've anonymously submitted your details. The relevant departments will come to take you for a big meal. The crowd sighed in unison. But this base can't be left idle. Starting today, you'll have a new career. The strong ones line up here. The quick ones line up here. The agile ones line up here. In no time, the 100 or so people were divided into 7 groups. Then I lazily said, from today on, this base will be converted into a tourist hotel. The strong ones will be porters, helping tourists with their luggage at the dock. The quick ones will handle cleaning. The agile ones will be drivers, taking tourists on trips around the country. The crowd was stunned. This meant they were being sent to do hard labor. I squinted at them. Any objections? Everyone shook their heads vigorously. No, we dare not. That day, Valoran's local news reported that the largest fraud syndicate had officially declared bankruptcy. The remaining members had formed a tourism hotel and were currently doing community service by picking up trash. Back at the National Security Bureau, staff watched the video in silence. On the night of the 4th, I hurriedly switched to the last transport. Driver, your speed is slower than a plowing ox. Let me drive. The driver, moving as slowly as his speech, said, I can't do that. I earn money by driving you. It wouldn't be right for you to drive. In the next second, I grabbed his shirt, lifted him to the back seat, and stepped on the gas. The car sped up to 120. The 3 other strangers in the car were terrified. Slow down. My heart can't take it. All I could think about was the medical examination the next morning. I drove like the wind, reducing the dozen-hour journey to 5. The driver, trembling, pointed at me. Taking other people's jobs makes money. Taking yours is risking my life. I didn't care at all, grabbing my luggage and running. Finally, at 6 a.m., I got home, put away all my weapons, took a shower, changed clothes, and returned to the dormitory. David, groggy, looked at me and muttered, Am I still dreaming? The holiday isn't over, how is Ethan back in the dorm? I shook my head helplessly. Don't forget the recruitment medical exam at 9. Then I went downstairs, scanned a shared bike, and rode all the way to the recruitment office. As soon as I arrived, I heard roll call starting. David, is he here? I thought to myself, could this guy really have decided not to sign up? The next second, a figure, panting heavily, rushed up to Director Stephen. Report, I'm late. Director Stephen's expression was unpleasant. You're exactly 5 minutes late. People with no sense of time have no right to join the army. David repeatedly apologized, I promise this is the last time. After David rejoined, he stood behind me, gritting his teeth. Why didn't you wait for me? I glanced at him coldly. So I could be late with you? David's face reddened as he turned his back to me. I stayed up too late playing games last night and couldn't get up this morning. I sighed helplessly. David, I think you should spend the money you use on games to get your brain checked. The medical exam continued until 3 in the afternoon. Just as I was about to have dinner with David, Director Richard stopped me. Helplessly, I got into the car with Director Richard. Ethan, where have you been these past few days? Resting at home. Director Richard sneered. Is your home in Valoran? I responded calmly. I've heard Valoran's environment is nice. Might consider it when I retire. Director Richard glared at me. Cut the nonsense. He handed me the local news. On screen, former thugs with knives and electric batons now held brooms and mops, cleaning the streets. Someone carefully filmed them, fearing the next second the broom would hit their face. Instead, the group, like they were on stimulants, enthusiastically said, protecting the environment is everyone's responsibility. This bizarre scene scared away passers-by. I couldn't help but laugh. Nice execution. Director Richard squinted at me. It was you, wasn't it? Just a small effort. Back home in the evening, after submitting the photos, I finally completed the task. Remember the 5-star review. I'm just 3 stars away from moving up in the rankings. Don't worry, definitely 5 stars. I'll refer clients to you in the future. Great, I'll give you a 20% discount next time. The next morning at 8, I was sleeping on my desk when David elbowed me awake. Buddy, your old acquaintance is here again. Yawning, I looked towards the door and saw the familiar face of Director Charles. Is it a nightmare before I'm even awake? Director Charles smiled. Ethan, seems like you've been quite busy during your leave? Yawning again, I replied, not bad, pretty fulfilling. Indeed, so busy you have no time to sleep. He then handed me a stack of documents. When I saw they were all records of Reborn's logins, I instantly became more alert. Ethan, you specifically came back for the recruitment medical exam, seems like you're serious about enlisting. I replied immediately, after all, everything else is just side jobs. Joining the army is what's important. Director Charles chuckled. Then let me be straightforward. Your current application cannot be approved. Unwilling to give up, I asked, are you sure? I haven't committed any crimes here. Director Charles stared at me for a long moment. You should be thankful we haven't arrested you. The Azura country military does not allow any potential threats. I smiled lightly. That's a pity. Then I left. The others stood solemnly, staring at my documents in silence. Suddenly, Director Stephen's phone rang. Stephen, it's Derek Blake. Do you remember me? Director Stephen stood at attention. Of course, sir. Is there something you need? The voice on the other end chuckled. Stephen, I'll get straight to the point. We've taken an interest in Ethan. Stephen was dumbfounded. So you want to transfer him directly under your command? No, this guy needs to be tempered within the military system. His arrogance needs to be ground down, said Director Blake. Still concerned, Stephen reminded Director Blake, Ethan is reborn, a mercenary. I know Ethan better than you do. Just approve him, and I'll handle the rest, Director Blake assured. Ever since returning from Director Charles's office, I had been in low spirits. Today was the last day for recruitment results, and David had already dragged me out of bed. Bro, get up, it's 8 o'clock. I rolled over in bed, continuing to lie flat. I probably didn't make it. I'm not checking. But David was too noisy. Why is this computer so slow? I've refreshed it 7 or 8 times already, so frustrating. Thoroughly woken up by his fussing, I saw hundreds of messages in the school's recruitment group, with someone reposting the query link every few minutes. Casually clicking it, I entered my information and logged in successfully. Suddenly, my pupils dilated, and I sprang up. I passed? From the lower bunk, David let out a thunderous howl, crying like a rainstorm. I can join the army. We're in the same camp. The unexpected recruitment success was a pleasant surprise. After all my efforts, I could finally legitimately protect the people of Azura country. 3 days later, I reported with my luggage to the main force. At the station, people looked at me curiously. Isn't he that spy? How can he join the army? If he were a spy, he wouldn't have passed the review. And so, everyone embarked on their military journey. On the train, people started getting acquainted. There were 132 of us, including 34 student soldiers and 98 recruits. David, being a social butterfly, wandered through every carriage, making himself known to everyone. I spent my time reading on the train. A few hours later, we arrived at the 76th Group Army Training Base. Everyone, carrying their luggage, looked around like they had never seen the world before. Listening to the platoon leader, Paul Turner, introducing the base's environment, the cafeteria is off limits except during meal times. Your dorms are in Building 3. The environment is good, with a mountain behind it. There are also many sheep and poultry raised here, taken care of by the kitchen staff. Carrying our dozens of pounds of luggage, we toured the base for a whole hour. Everyone was panting and sweating but held on. Only after circling around did the platoon leader finally lead us to Building 3. There were 8-person dorms, and David and I were assigned to the same one. Just as I was about to put my luggage on a lower bunk near the door, someone beat me to it, throwing their backpack onto the bed. This spot is nice. I'll sleep here. Expressionless, I moved to another lower bunk, only for it to be taken by someone else. That's when I realized these guys were targeting me. David waved from another lower bunk. Ethan, over here. I leapt up to the upper bunk above David's. It seemed like my first day in the military had already sown discord with the dorm mates. After everyone settled their luggage, squad leader Ian Clark came to each dorm to emphasize hygiene rules. All basins should be aligned, and the tops of all cabinets must be spotless. Daily inspections will follow, he said, handing each of us an internal affairs manual. You need to memorize the entire manual, starting with the general provisions today. After the squad leader left, the other 6 groaned. There's the new recruits meeting this afternoon, then dinner, and then organizing our quarters. There's no time to study the manual. No way they'll test us today. It's already late. Let's just sleep. Holding the manual, I quietly slipped out the door, with David following. Ethan, will they really test us? I replied calmly, this is the military. Anything can happen. We were both top students from Coastal University. Memorizing the manual was relatively easy for us. It didn't take long before I ran into the guy who had taken my bed, Miles Harper. He was the type who, when struggling academically, would drag others down with him. Wow, it's the 2 top students, studying late into the night, he sneered. I glanced at him indifferently. In a race, lazy pigs are always the slowest. They end up getting slaughtered. With that, I turned and headed back to the dorm, leaving Miles stunned. Did Ethan just call me a pig? The next morning at 6, the reveille sounded, and instead of a hearty breakfast, we faced a long line outside the mess hall. Ian, cold as ever, announced, only those who can recite the first chapter of the Internal Affairs Manual can eat. If you can recite it, report in. If not, you can stand here and savor the smell. I stood at the back of the line, watching my teammates sigh in frustration. Suddenly, someone shouted, report. Miles pointed at me maliciously. My roommate Ethan can recite it. Ian frowned. He can't speak for himself? Why are you reporting for him? Then Ian approached me and said, since he says you can recite it, let's hear it. I recited it perfectly, as if reading from the manual, without missing a word. Many gritted their teeth, glaring at my back. On the first day, I had already made enemies. David, though stumbling a bit, also completed the recitation. 10 people, stomachs growling and eyes fierce, stood at the mess hall entrance, reciting the manual. After breakfast, we had physical training. Instructor Jack Carter, expressionless, announced, 5 kilometers cross-country run, within 40 minutes. If you fail, you'll be cleaning the sheep pen today. This physical training boosted the confidence of Miles and his gang. What else can these bookworms do besides recite? Ian pulled Miles to the back of the line. Since you love talking, you'll count. Size count 2, 10 words per minute. Let's see who ends up cleaning the sheep pen. At the whistle, everyone started jogging around the back mountain. I stayed towards the back, with only a few people between Miles and me. Everything seemed fine at first. After 20 minutes, some began to tire. How many meters left? I'm exhausted, someone panted. Miles was struggling but remembered his task, counting every word spoken by the tired ones. David was already panting heavily, struggling for breath. I was used to this, not even breaking a sweat. Adjust your breathing rhythm. 3 steps in, 3 steps out, I advised. Those behind me followed my pace, feeling less fatigued. They couldn't help but admire, Ethan, you're amazing. I quickly shushed them, pointing to Miles. Miles, though red-faced and exhausted, couldn't hide his smirk. David worried, knowing Miles would target me. Gradually, we moved from the back to the middle, distancing ourselves from Miles. The group expanded to about 30, and I nearly turned it into a speed walk to match everyone's pace. We finished right at the 40-minute mark, the worst score for recruits but still meeting the standard. 8 didn't, including Miles. Miles arrogantly handed Ian a list. Report, squad leader. Here's the list of those who talked, with Ethan talking the most. Ian glanced at us, then called out, Ethan Quinn, Daniel Ford, Ryan Mitchell, and you 8. You'll be cleaning the sheep pen today. Ian had everyone line up. I've already arranged with the kitchen staff. We'll be cleaning the sheep pen this month. Everyone winced. Can't you arrange something better? Next, we had formation training. Standing at attention alone took up the whole morning. You can't even execute at ease properly? Are you idiots? Ian barked. We struggled through the morning. The group trudged to the mess hall like zombies, but even there, they faced more questions about the internal affairs manual, adding to their frustration. The hall was silent except for the sound of chopsticks against plates. Despite the food being unremarkable, everyone devoured every bite, leaving nothing behind. After leaving the mess hall, David asked me, "Don't you feel tired?" I replied, "Isn't this basic? Why would it be tiring?" David stared at me in disbelief. Have you been possessed by a military spirit? We had barely settled back in the dorm when the assembly call dragged everyone out of bed again. Exhausted and aching, we reluctantly gathered downstairs. Captain Paul barked, "Can't remember the manual, fall behind in physical training, are you planning to hand your guns to the enemy on the battlefield?" Many were resentful. They were new recruits, so why were they being treated like seasoned soldiers? Their dissatisfaction was written all over their faces. No rest this noon, Turner continued. I'll show you how the veterans train. He led us to another training field. There, veterans were practicing their drills, marching in perfect unison. The synchronized stomp of their boots made the ground tremble. After finishing their drills, the first row stepped forward to the firing line, rifles ready. At the instructor's whistle, they all fired simultaneously. At 500 meters, every shot hit the bullseye. The sight of the rifles excited everyone, eyes filled with admiration. Amazing! When can we shoot like that, they wondered. I remained unfazed throughout. Instructor Paul scoffed, see the real gap in skill? With your pathetic abilities, you'll never reach this level of marksmanship. Some recruits, particularly the defiant ones, muttered, we just started. Given time, we can be as good as them. It's just shooting, anyone can do it. Paul sneered, if you're so confident, why not compete with the veterans? This challenge boosted the recruits' spirits. Fine, let's compete. But 500 meters is a bit much for us, isn't it? How about 200 meters then? Any takers? Few volunteered, but many jeered. Some looked at me, hey, you're always so secretive. Got any hidden skills? Show us what you've got and earn some respect for us newbies. I said calmly, I've never used these old antiques. My experience is with the latest tech. Miles chimed in sarcastically, you expect Ethan to save us? Desperate times call for desperate measures, huh? Many were curious and asked Miles if he had handled a gun before. Of course, he boasted, our brother Miles will show you how it's done. However, the actual weight of the gun surprised him. He had only ever handled guns at professional shooting ranges, and now the heavy rifle felt like it would pull his arm out of its socket. I stood quietly to the side, observing Miles' incorrect stance and strained arm position. With a loud bang, his shot barely traveled 100 meters before burying itself in the ground. I shook my head in disbelief. How can he claim to be the pride of his village with skills like that? Miles's friends noticed my reaction. Ethan, what right do you have to mock Brother Liang? At least he stepped up for us, what about you? Before I could respond, Paul intervened sternly. Is this how you new recruits treat each other? Pushing blame, attacking one another? On the battlefield, will you fight each other over who goes which direction? The group fell silent, heads bowed like chastened children. Miles's face turned pale with embarrassment. The veterans, standing nearby, laughed and jeered, adding to our humiliation. Suddenly, I stepped forward, drawing everyone's attention. Miles gritted his teeth and whispered, come back before you make a fool of yourself. Ignoring him, I took the rifle Paul tossed me. My grip and stance were textbook perfect. The new recruits continued to jeer, oblivious. But the veterans, recognizing my form, were taken aback. Everyone strained to see the target. Did he hit it? They wondered, uncertain. Ian and Paul used binoculars to check the target. Ethan, how do you think you did? Not bad, I replied nonchalantly. At just 200 meters, I could hit it with my eyes closed. The veterans scoffed at my arrogance. While Paul calmly announced, Ethan, 10 rings. The veterans were stunned, and the recruits gaped at me. Did this guy step in sheep dung yesterday? How is he so lucky today? Paul silenced the chatter. Ethan, care to try 300 meters? I pondered silently, while the recruits assumed I was backing down. He knows when to quit, they murmured, 300 meters would expose him. Miles sneered, don't bite off more than you can chew. If you mess up, we'll all pay for it. David defended me, what's this got to do with Ethan? He even helped you clean up your mess. I stepped forward. 300 meters is too easy. Let's go straight to 500. Both recruits and veterans burst into laughter. Is he still dreaming? A rookie acting so cocky, how will he save face? David was worried. Bro, you're really pushing it. We should quit while we're ahead. But Paul clapped his hands. Good. I admire your courage. Let's see if you have the skill to back it up. Taking the rifle with a blank expression, I moved to the firing line. After a brief adjustment, I fired, then casually handed the gun back to Paul. Everyone looked puzzled. Was it over? Did he give up? Paul looked through the binoculars, his expression changing to one of astonishment. Ethan, how do you think you did this time? My performance earned me a new nickname, Rookie Sniper. Paul's mouth twitched before he announced, Ethan, 10 rings at 500 meters. The crowd was stunned into silence, their gazes shifting from curiosity to admiration to jealousy. My performance earned me a new nickname, Rookie Sniper. This also drew a following, with more recruits gravitating towards me. David was overjoyed to see our circle grow from just him to over a dozen admirers. It was thanks to the system granting me the sharpshooter skill that in the following period, I became the focal point of everyone's attention. Occasionally, my fellow soldiers would mock me, but what surprised me was how the squad leader, the platoon leader, and even the instructor seemed to join in with them. Every training session for me included additional tasks. For instance, while others ran 5 kilometers, I had to run 6, others stood at attention for an hour, I had to stand for an additional 10 minutes, others did 500 push-ups, I had to do 800. Even in theoretical classes, I was called out twice as often as anyone else. Initially, many thought I was receiving too much attention. But while others were already resting in their bunks, I was still dragging my exhausted body back to the dorm, prompting comments like, serves him right for showing off. Just as I had drifted off to sleep today, an assembly whistle woke everyone up. Before I could even open my eyes, my body reflexively started making my bed. I was the first downstairs, dark circles under my eyes. Once everyone had gathered, Paul announced cheerfully, there's a tradition in the recruits platoon to organize a celebration for those who've been enlisted for a month. At the mention of a celebration, everyone's spirits lifted. When does it start, Lieutenant? What kind of acts do we prepare? I can play the guitar, do we have one here? People eagerly inquired about their strengths. But then Paul added, our daily training tasks are set, so you can only have the celebration in the evening. Everyone's enthusiasm deflated. Lieutenant, can we not participate? We're dead tired from the day. Suddenly, Paul's demeanor turned stern. It's a tradition, and it's mandatory. Do you not understand? Everyone instantly fell silent, the area as quiet as a graveyard. Only then did Paul smile with satisfaction. Now, let me explain the rules of the celebration. It starts at 12 p.m. He listed off the events, standing at attention for 100 meters, 400 meters relay, 1000 meters race, push-ups. He rattled off over a dozen physical challenges without a single mention of anything remotely entertaining. Everyone was confused. What's this all about? Who is this supposed to make happy? Is it for the veterans? As expected, a group of veterans approached with mocking smiles. Paul shamelessly said, see, I've even arranged an audience for you. As if on cue, a cloud of rain gathered above the recruits. The veterans, prepared, opened 2 large umbrellas to the side, while the recruits had to perform the so-called standing at attention in the rain. Paul sipped his goji berry tea leisurely. The competition will include individual and group events, with a reward for the winning team. You'll organize your groups soon. What was supposed to be a simple act of standing at attention became more complicated as the veterans fetched some ropes with small bells attached, placed on sticks at either end of the lines. The slightest movement would disturb the ropes beneath them, and the team had to endure 10 minutes like this. If a team's bell rang, they had to continue for an additional 2 minutes. As the rain intensified, everyone's clothes became soaked. 7 minutes in, someone made a bell ring. Paul remarked lightly, first row, add 2 minutes. Every second in this situation was torture. He glanced curiously at me, noticing that I was as still as a statue, only moving to lift my leg. Standing in the first row, by the time my teammates reached 10 minutes, their expressions were pained, the legs they stood on beginning to shake. Then another bell rang from the back rows. Second row, add 2 minutes. That's 6 minutes extra now. Just like that, a simple act of standing at attention lasted 20 minutes. When this ordeal was finally announced over, everyone sighed in relief, their walks shaky and uneven. The next event was a 100-meter dash, run in groups of 4, with the average score of the group taken. A less coordinated individual joined my group, someone who had always been at the bottom in previous performances, considered a burden by other groups. I reassured him casually, don't worry, I won't let you be the last one. Despite his inner turmoil, determined not to let me down, he resolved to give his all. The sprint race officially began, with Miles's group running before ours. Each member was a sprint expert, dashing forward like a streak of light as soon as the starting gun fired, averaging a time of 12.73 seconds, comparable to a national level 3 athlete. Miles and his group looked at us provocatively. Little guy, you better push hard. Don't use Ethan as an excuse for losing. Henry Parker, the one they called Little Guy, was a freshman from another university in Greendale City. He had spent his high school years rising early and studying late, doing just enough in physical education to get by. As a result, he often finished last in the military exercises and had secretly cried several times. I walked over and patted him on the shoulder. Keep a level head. Winning or losing doesn't matter. Just make sure every step is firm and stable when you're with me. Henry nodded, moved. At the sound of the whistle, I shot forward like a bullet from a gun, reaching the target point like a meteor. Before anyone could even make a wish, I was at the finish line. Bruce Lee, dumbfounded, watched Miles and muttered, "Why do I feel like he's faster than us?" Vincent Cole elbowed him, "You're seeing things, man. We don't see ourselves running, so we have no concept of time." Henry still looked down, guilty. "I was still so much slower than you, dragging everyone down." I reassured Henry, "You did really well just now, much faster than your previous times." He sighed in relief, eagerly awaiting the results. Our group's average time was 12.39 seconds. When the results were announced, the scene turned chaotic. Henry was far behind, yet our group was faster than Miles's. Could there be a mistake? Maybe some foul play? Suddenly, Paul fired a gun into the sky, silencing everyone. David finished in 12.52 seconds, Edward in 12.72 seconds, Henry in 13.1 seconds, and I completed the race in 11.2 seconds. Henry's eyes widened in shock, having clocked 13 seconds, whereas he usually hovered around 14 seconds. Really? 11.2 seconds? That's the level of a national-class athlete. One prodigy saves the team. Paul smiled slightly, having noticed I had slowed down just before reaching the finish line, puzzled about my true capability. Henry, determined, resolved to always follow in my footsteps, aspiring to be my right-hand man. In the subsequent 400-meter relay, our team once again broke the record. Miles's group finished in 51.98 seconds, with other groups trailing beyond 52 seconds. I estimated silently, just need to run under 50 seconds. Encouraged by me, Henry even improved a bit. I nearly hit 50 seconds exactly as I crossed the finish line. The veteran timing the race grunted, "Ethan's team total time, 50.03 seconds. A veteran whispered to me as I slowed my final sprint, "You slowed down again." I just smiled, not responding. By 4 a.m., as the rain intensified, this absurd celebration was finally coming to an end. Everyone thought the celebration was over and we could catch up on a couple of hours of sleep. However, Paul had other plans. "Haven't practiced marching in the rain, have you? Today's a good day to learn." Everyone groaned as their drenched clothes clung to their bodies, each step feeling the wet fabric slide over their skin. Initially, everyone kept up a light jog, but the pace gradually slowed. Like snails, we all crept forward. Exhausted, we somehow managed to reach our destination by 5:30 a.m., finding no one there but a note left for us. Opening it, we were dumbfounded. It read, "Just remembered you didn't bring your luggage, so this isn't a proper march. Standard luggage weight, 25 kilograms. Everyone flipped the note over and over, confused. Was the text washed away? Are we supposed to go back and bring up 25 kilograms of luggage? Pensive, I started scanning the surroundings, using my eagle-eye skill to meticulously inspect the area, discovering numerous tools scattered around. With a slight smile and a murmur, I realized, so that's it. Edward asked, "Ethan, do you understand what this means?" I understood that we needed to prepare a weight of 25 kilograms, regardless of what it was. Trees, stones, or bricks around us could be used, I mentioned in a low voice. Many heard me and someone questioned with a frown, "What if it's not right? Would we have carried the weight for nothing? Could it be a hint for us to go back and get our luggage?" Ignoring the surrounding murmurs, David and Henry asked me directly, "What should we do, Ethan?" "We'll follow your lead." More and more people began to trust my judgment, and soon about half the group chose to believe in me. Calmly, I explained, "On the way here, I noticed sandbags and stones along the roadside. We need a few people to go back and fetch them." Immediately, 5 volunteers responded, "I'll go get them." Then I pointed to 2 nearby trees, noting, "There are 2 axes hanging on the trunk of that tree." People felt something odd about the trees but couldn't pinpoint what exactly it was. Soon, everyone had gathered the materials around me. Only then did everyone notice that each sandbag was marked as weighing 10 kilograms. The stones, though irregular in shape, were approximately the same weight. Miles and others, seeing the ample supply of materials, started to realize it might be as I had described. Yet, they stubbornly insisted, "I don't think that's it. There must be another way." I distributed the weights evenly to everyone, leaving a few stones unassigned. I examined the axes in my hands, surprised they weren't used. The axes alone weighed about 10 kilograms together. By then, the rain had stopped. Inside the surveillance room, Paul and Jack Carter watched the live feed. "Ethan, this guy got something," Paul observed, impressed by my accurate guess. In the past, only a few could truly understand their meaning, and those individuals usually showed strong leadership qualities. As our group nearly reached the foot of the mountain, we encountered a dejected Miles and his group heading uphill. I intended to pass them without a word. However, someone from behind me stepped forward first. Isn't that Brother Liang? Why are you coming back? Didn't you go to get bags like us? How could that be? He's always been so decisive. Our group's mockery made Miles clench his fists, glaring fiercely at me. Ethan, you just wait. I glanced at him indifferently, thinking to myself, what does this have to do with me? You're the fool, can't blame others for being smarter. As our group reached the base of the mountain, we saw Ian standing in front of a scale. Put your packs on the scale. Only those who pass can leave. Everyone confidently placed their packs on the scale, feeling quite smug as everyone passed. Go eat, you should still get some food, Ian announced. By then it was 9:30 a.m., well past the usual dining hours. Since noon the previous day, we had almost gone 20 hours without sleep, hungry and exhausted. Hoping for a hearty meal, we arrived at the dining hall only to find leftovers. I must be dreaming. I hope I wake up soon. Then someone chuckled, at least we still have something to eat for a while. When Miles and his group returned, they found no soup left. Suddenly, comparing our lots, the soup in our bowls seemed like a feast. We poured the soup over our rice and devoured it ravenously, then headed back to the dorms and collapsed into bed. But 2 hours later, David and I were awakened by noise. It turned out, Miles and his group had just completed their task and seeing us comfortably asleep, felt discontent and deliberately made noise. I opened my eyes briefly, and David, annoyed, said, "Can you keep it down? We're still resting." Miles, in his typical acerbic tone, said, "Haven't you slept enough? I thought you might miss dinner in the dining hall, just trying to be considerate." Then he approached my bed. "Does seeing me like this make you happy?" I responded emotionlessly, "You're mistaken. I feel nothing about you." Miles was furious, feeling utterly disregarded. In the afternoon, it was time for shooting training. Everyone treated the firearms with the anticipation of seeing a long-lost treasure. Initially, during the training, the guns were unloaded. We practiced our stance first, holding the guns for several minutes until our arms uncontrollably began to droop. During training, Paul and Jack would strike our arms hard with a ruler if we tensed up. "Is the target on the ground? With your shooting, you might as well be hunting moles," they'd say sarcastically. Everyone grimaced under the sting of the ruler. Out of everyone, I was never hit. Paul often stood by my side. But I remained steadfast and faultless, so he had to find others to hassle. David whispered to me, "Ethan, it's not cool to keep your techniques to yourself." Paul, overhearing our whispers, smirked maliciously. "Yes, Ethan, you're all peers. Your techniques must be practical." With Paul's mocking smile, I mentally cursed. What techniques? Years of holding guns on the front line, does that count as technique? Or the experience gained from actual combat, is that a technique? I could only fabricate calmly. As a child, I liked to stretch my arms out holding a water jug in each hand. If I trembled, I'd punish myself with another minute. Later in college, I went to the gym to lift barbells. Holding a gun mainly tests your arm strength. David listened intently and nodded seriously, but when I mentioned the gym, he whispered, "Ethan, aren't you always too busy with part-time jobs? When do you have time for the gym?" Paul looked amused, eager to see how I'd explain. Through gritted teeth, I said, "During holidays." David, suddenly understanding, clapped his hands. "That's why we can't find you during vacations, you're at the gym." Relieved, I agreed, "Yes, and I often run marathons too." Henry also realized, "No wonder you're so good at running, it must be the marathons." Paul, looking impressed, gave me a thumbs up. To others, it appeared the lieutenant acknowledged my capabilities. When the guns were loaded, everyone became solemn. Jack stated, "For your first shooting, we don't expect you to hit the bullseye, just hitting the target is fine." 10 of us lined up, aiming at targets in the distance. "Only 50 meters, how hard can it be?" Jack glanced at the boastful recruits. "You think 50 meters is easy to achieve? Try hitting the target first." Everyone raised their guns, slowly bringing their eyes close to the scopes. A slight tremor in the arm could shift the crosshair off the target, and just aiming made everyone break into a sweat. Jack highlighted a few techniques and started counting, 3, 2, 1. Gunshots followed intermittently, some didn't fire at all. Those who did were shocked by the numbness in their arms from the recoil. Jack approached those who hadn't fired. "Why didn't you shoot?" They hesitated, "Because we couldn't align with the target. In the military, following orders is paramount." They fired again, and this time the best score was 7 rings, with 3 missing the target altogether. "Now, do you still think 50 meters is simple?" The first row of recruits shook their heads. "Ethan, it's your fault for making it look so easy. We thought shooting was simple." When it was my group's turn, something unexpected happened. Jack called me aside to a different position. While everyone else aimed at 50 meters, I was tasked with 600 meters. Everyone was shocked, predicting a stark contrast. Is this the gap where we start? It seemed everyone thought I had unlocked the 50-meter achievement in the womb. Envy slowly turned into admiration. Even Miles's feelings towards me grew more complex. Resigned, I took the gun Jack handed me. I held it just like everyone else, without moving. 3, 2, 1. Bang, bang, bang. This time everyone fired simultaneously. In this group, 2 promising recruits hit the bullseye, only 1 missed. Everyone craned their necks, eagerly awaiting my score. Jack deliberately dragged out the announcement. Ethan, 600 meters, 10 rings. Instant cheers erupted. I was truly the undisputed sharpshooter. Then he added, Ethan, about shooting, share any tips you have with everyone. I took a deep breath and said, don't worry, I will. As I turned around, my expression changed suddenly. The lieutenant and the instructor were clearly trying to give me a hard time. I just wanted to stay in the army without any complications. 3 months passed quickly, and soon it was time for us to part ways. During that time, Miles gradually let go of his hostility and defensiveness towards me. This time, each new recruit was given a volunteer form to fill out. In the end, I chose a place that no one expected, the reconnaissance platoon. Inside Paul's office, Philip, the lieutenant of the sniper platoon, and Martin, the lieutenant of the reconnaissance platoon, were arguing heatedly. Ethan is a promising recruit, and he's already skilled in sniping. He should join our sniper platoon to further enhance his skills. A forced recruit won't be happy. Haven't you heard of that? He chose our reconnaissance platoon, your pining is pointless. Martin, didn't I steal a good recruit from you back in the day? Are you still holding that grudge? You admit you stole a good recruit from me? His situation was just like Ethan's, he wouldn't settle for anything but our reconnaissance platoon. What did you do, hypnotize him? Paul, their bickering grating on his ears, interjected, enough, enough. You two are heated up here, but Ethan might not even appreciate it. That evening, I was summoned to Paul's office. Upon entering, I saw someone sitting on the sofa with 3 stripes on his epaulette, so I saluted respectfully, good evening, sir. The person nodded in acknowledgement. Paul, smiling, said, I've seen your volunteer form, you want to join the reconnaissance platoon. I nodded. He continued, your shooting skills are outstanding among the new recruits. The sniper platoon would also suit you if you're interested in specializing. Martin, silent until then, shot Paul an unhappy look. I glanced at both and stated calmly, I want to become a more versatile soldier. The reconnaissance platoon tests a soldier's comprehensive abilities. Paul nodded. This is Martin Cole, the captain of the reconnaissance platoon. He'd like to talk to you. I saluted Martin, Captain Martin, good to meet you. Martin, increasingly impressed, chuckled, I'm glad to welcome you to the reconnaissance platoon in advance. I've heard all your tests, you only just beat the second best, never fully showing your potential. I calmly replied, no, it's all just luck. Martin laughed again, you're the type who thrives under challenge. If someone were to headhunt you, would you consider it? My thoughts immediately went to the sniper platoon that Paul had mentioned. In school, I couldn't even win over a girl, and now I'm suddenly blossoming? The reconnaissance platoon is my goal. If I want to be a special forces soldier, I need to be versatile. Paul chimed in indifferently, do you know that shooting skills are also crucial for special forces? I smiled slightly, shooting is not a problem for me. Hearing this, Paul almost wanted to rush up and shake me, thinking, look at this braggart. Isn't it enough to be first in long-distance running, sprinting, shooting, and physical fitness? Martin, who had not expected my determination, got carried away in his excitement and blurted out a few complaints about old Philip, feeling like Captain Lee was reporting to me. Paul coughed twice, and Martin finally stopped. After I left, Martin frowned at Paul, slamming his hand down on the desk. Paul, we've known each other for so many years, why are you still playing mediator? Paul sighed, then cheekily added, Philip gave me 2 cans of top-grade Da Hong Pao tea. I couldn't help but support him. Martin clenched his teeth, 2 cans of Da Hong Pao tea have swayed you? Where's your dignity? Your moral bottom line? The justice you stand for? Paul's eyes darted around nervously. After all, we're all in the same military district, all one family, right? Isn't it the same no matter whose hands it's in? His voice faded as he spoke, losing confidence by the end. Martin pointed at him for a long while, too angered to speak. Finally, he grabbed the cup of goji berry tea Paul had just brewed and angrily poured it over Paul's favorite orchid before storming out. Left alone, Paul looked mournfully at his orchid. My poor plant, why am I so unlucky? The next day, I visited Paul's office again. This time, however, I was greeted by a new face, Philip Thompson, the commander of the sniper platoon. He got straight to the point. Ethan, objectively speaking, based on your shooting skills, you should join the sniper platoon for advanced training. I've heard you're interested in joining the special forces, right? Any platoon can serve as a stepping stone to the special forces. I remained firm in my decision, thank you for your appreciation, Commander Philip, but I still prefer the reconnaissance platoon. However, if you insist on me staying in the sniper platoon, I have no objections. Thank you for your invitation. Then I left. Philip turned to Paul, puzzled. What did he mean by that? Is he considering joining our sniper platoon? Paul sighed helplessly. Ethan was just being polite to avoid hurting your feelings. That was a tactful rejection. Frustrated, Philip glared at Paul and took the 2 cans of Da Hong Pao tea from the table as he left. The deal wasn't made, and such fine things are wasted on you. Paul chased after him. At least leave 1 can for me. I did try to help you. It's really thankless, caught in the middle either way. A few days later, the platoon assignments were announced. David and Henry went to the artillery platoon. While surprisingly, Miles ended up in the sniper platoon. Edward and I were assigned to the reconnaissance platoon. Edward, thrilled upon hearing this, jumped for joy. Great to have you with me, now I can relax. Though we had only been together for 3 months, Henry was particularly sad to part ways with me. His current level was largely due to my encouragement and protection. Now separated, he was unsure about his future. I comforted him, there will be plenty of opportunities to meet in the future. Platoon assignments are based on each individual's abilities. I hope by the next time we meet, you all will have excelled in your respective platoons. We're always ready to help whenever needed. Everyone firmly repeated, whenever needed, we're always ready. That evening, everyone packed their bags and reported to their new platoons. On the way to the reconnaissance platoon, Edward was visibly excited. I heard we're in the same section, 2nd Squad, sharing a dorm with the veterans. Do you think they'll set rules for us? His chatter gave me a headache. Remember this, do what you must, don't overstep. Edward nodded, relieved. With you here, I feel fearless. Upon reaching the dorm, it was empty, likely everyone was out training. Edward immediately claimed a lower bunk for his luggage, and I took the one above. As we were settling in, the veterans returned from training, and we quickly greeted them. I'm Ethan, and this is Edward. Hearing my name, a few exchanged looks and scoffed. Ethan, we heard you're a hotshot shooter. What are you doing in the reconnaissance platoon? Aren't you supposed to be the best among the new recruits? Edward was taken aback by the palpable tension just upon arriving. I responded calmly, thank you for the recognition. Edward, confused, whispered, bro, how do you figure they're recognizing you? They're clearly targeting you. My response left the veterans momentarily speechless, their aggressive remarks fell flat. We're not recognizing you, we're curious to see how you'll perform. I smiled, thanks for your concern. I'll make sure to perform well. The veterans looked skyward, speechless. Ethan just doesn't get it, does he? Of course, I understand, but it's easier to keep things simple, though it's clear they're looking for trouble. One of the veterans, named Kevin Harris, pointed at the bed Edward had just made and demanded, who told you could sleep there? Edward, embarrassed, replied, aren't we allowed? We saw these 2 beds were empty, so we just put our luggage there. The other sharply retorted, these are our usual resting beds. Move your stuff now. Edward's face went pale as he began to obediently gather his belongings. That's when I intervened, questioning if the other empty bed was off limits too. Kevin raising an eyebrow and declared, we're taking both beds. You 2 can sleep on the top bunks. There's no rule stating that new recruits can only sleep on top bunks. The veterans laughed uproariously at this. Military rules mean you follow the commands of the veterans. Did you know that? I shook my head, we're all equals here. I respect you by listening to you, but you can't disrespect the elderly. The veterans twitched their brows, one of them signaling to the others, who quickly began to shut the doors and windows. Edward, realizing what was happening, shrank back in fear. Fighting is forbidden in the military. The veterans mocked, who's fighting? We're just looking out for our new comrades. I countered, are you sure this isn't fighting? One of them clenched his fists, cracking them ominously, nobody saw any fighting. Relieved, I responded, if you say so, then I'm reassured. The veterans were momentarily stunned by my comment, not grasping its meaning. In the next moment, I grabbed one by the collar, swung him around in midair, and slammed him down on the ground. The smiles on the faces of the soldiers froze. The person himself didn't even realize what had happened. Edward gaped in shock, astonished by my speed. To prevent the man from hitting his head, I thoughtfully held his collar so he landed on his buttocks first. I smiled slightly, I'm not fighting, I'm just caring for a veteran, right? This smile, however, sent chills down their spines. The others, recovering from their shock, rolled up their sleeves and moved toward me. I grabbed one of the incoming fists and twisted the arm behind the attacker's back. The veteran hissed in pain. With gentle ease, I neutralized the others. Then, pointing to Edward's bed, I asked, is this bed off limits now? Reluctantly, but with compliance, they grunted in assent. Just then, the platoon sergeant returned, frowning at the hostile veterans staring at me as if they were looking at an enemy. He demanded loudly, "What's going on here? Weren't you instructed to be kind to the new recruits?" The veterans, faces grim, scoffed coldly, "We were indeed very kind." The sergeant, named George Butler, warmly introduced us to the dorm members, ending with a special instruction, "We are a united and loving unit here. If anyone bullies you, you come and tell me." Edward, relieved yet dismayed, thought, "You could have said that earlier. Then we wouldn't have witnessed such a terrifying scene." I assured him, "Sure, Sergeant. I value this loving community." Kevin's mouth twitched. As Sergeant George, a man of great detail, explained numerous rules and regulations. The entire platoon gathered on the training field in the afternoon. The reconnaissance platoon consisted of 3 companies. 9 squads, plus a mess squad, totaling over 100 people awaiting the platoon leader's speech. Martin immediately noticed me due to my height and managed a rare smile. "Today we welcome many new recruits to our reconnaissance platoon, let's give them a warm welcome." Applause echoed through the ranks. Reconnaissance isn't just about scouting. We cover computers, sniping, environmental surveying, and assault tactics. In 5 months, it's the annual military exercise. "Show me what you're made of." "Don't embarrass me," he said, glancing my way. Then the squads dispersed to begin their individual training. However, due to the morning's incident, hostility lingered towards Edward and me in the dorm. During physical training, although it's common for squad leaders to go easy on new recruits, letting veterans run 100 meters while new recruits run only 80, this was not my experience. But Kevin came over to provoke, "I heard you're also great at physical fitness. Dare to compete?" I looked at him with a half smile. "What's the penalty or reward for winning or losing? Just verbal isn't very interesting." Kevin, still fuming about being humiliated earlier, saw this as an opportunity for revenge. "Whoever loses cleans the dorm for a week and must also fetch wash water for the winner." Edward furrowed his brows. "Ethan, I'm not that strong, I hope I don't drag you down." "No worries, I accept." I whispered to Edward, "Adjust your position during the race so the heavier part of the log is on my side, just keep up with my pace." Edward was very concerned, "But that's 50 kilograms, even you shouldn't carry the heavier part alone. They will find faults with us again if we don't prove ourselves now. We need to show our strength so they stop picking on us." Edward nodded, deciding to trust me. At that moment, the sergeant was called over to act as the referee. Edward and I stood on one side carrying a log. Beside us were Kevin and James. The log, about 1.5 meters long and weighing around 50 kilograms, had a rough surface. I positioned myself slightly towards the middle. Edward stood behind me, less than 50 centimeters between us. The other veteran snickered, thinking I was foolish for not knowing that standing in the middle would be harder, clearly inexperienced. The sergeant wanted to remind me about my position, but seeing as both sides had agreed to it, he decided not to interfere. At the start signal, both teams set off. Kevin and James, well coordinated, stepped simultaneously, exerting equal force, moving quickly. In contrast, Edward and I were out of sync, and he fumbled behind me, gradually widening the gap. However, we slowly found our rhythm and I started to speed up. Surprisingly, we managed to overtake them. Untrained and still running that fast, the log nearly bouncing, their shoulders must have been tearing apart. When we reached the finish line, Kevin and James had dark faces, they were 6 meters from the finish. I set down the log, my green camouflage uniform soaked with dark red blood. We had finished first. Breathing heavily, Kevin and James ran to the finish. Their faces were a mix of red and white. Someone couldn't contain themselves, losing to 2 rookies, how embarrassing for us veterans. Murmurs followed, but our dorm mates remained silent. It seemed I was hiding my true strength on purpose to embarrass them. Edward came over excitedly, "Bro, you were amazing. Now let's see how they can bully us." But then he saw the blood-soaked patch on my shoulder and his face fell. "Let's get you to the medical station." I replied, "Hold on, we haven't received our reward yet." Edward hesitated, "Maybe we should let it go, we're just rookies and they are veterans." My gaze moved past him to a few men behind him. Rules are rules. Kevin and James were still stuck in the humiliation of their loss. I approached and asked, "Is the bet we made still on?" Kevin's face turned ashen, squeezing out words through gritted teeth, "A bet is a bet." I stated, "Then I'll leave the dorm cleaning and foot washing to you for the next week." Kevin was dumbfounded. Normally one would politely decline the bet after winning, but I didn't play by those rules. The other dorm mates, having heard our conversation, were all bewildered. A veteran serving a rookie was indeed unheard of. Later in the afternoon, training resumed as usual. The veterans stared at us with hostility, but I continued to enjoy my meals as if nothing had happened. When Edward and I returned to the dorm at 9:30 p.m., drenched in sweat, we pushed open the door to find everyone seated on stools, staring at us as we entered. I headed straight for the shower with my basin. Edward murmured softly, "They might be holding a grudge, right?" I calmly replied, "We'll handle it as it comes, don't worry, it might not happen." The shower room had 10 showerheads, each with its own partition. As we were showering, suddenly a group of veterans, about 10 of them, barged in. One of them went straight to Edward. "Let me shower first." Edward, his hair full of shampoo, was caught off guard by the demand for his shower spot, but the other person had already placed their basin on the shelf. Then, another man did the same at my side. Edward, feeling pressured by the taller man, reluctantly moved aside. I frowned slightly but continued to soap up calmly. The man beside me smirked. "Brother, move over." I replied deliberately slowly, "Not done yet." The others looked on, half smirking. The man felt his pride was at stake. "You're a rookie, right? Rookies should follow the rules." I glanced at a poster on the wall behind him listing civil behaviors, which included no fighting and conserving water resources. There was nothing about rookies having to give way to veterans. This caused a shift in expression among the onlookers. "What's with the gunshot wounds on your body? That can't be right, you must be seeing things wrong." People followed the veteran's pointing hand and indeed spotted a red, swollen, irregular scar on my body, covered with dense signs of post-suture healing. I quickly finished showering and was ready to leave, but those 10 had me completely blocked in. I asked, "Are we sure we want to chat without any clothes on?" The veterans looked grave. I took my basin and pushed through the crowd, planning to leave alone. Unexpectedly, one of them grabbed my wrist. "We're asking you something. Are you deaf?" I met his menacing look and then casually glanced at the no fighting sign on the wall. The veteran suddenly laughed heartily. "Who said anything about fighting? It's normal to bump into each other in a slippery shower." I slightly curled my lips upward. "Slipping and bumping is normal, then." Hearing this, Edward suddenly had a foreboding feeling, reminiscent of something familiar. At that moment, I flipped my basin over one veteran's head. He was still laughing, completely unprepared for the attack. I swiftly moved, hooking my foot around another man's leg. He fell immediately, causing a domino effect in the cramped space. Others fell one by one, like pins in a bowling alley. The veterans cried out in pain. "Ouch, don't move, you're pressing on my leg." As I stepped over them, I remarked, "Slipping and bumping is normal." Then, Edward and I left without looking back. The veterans, infuriated and in pain, helped each other up slowly. "Should we report this to the platoon leader?" "How can we report it? Say that 10 of us got knocked down by a rookie in the shower?" The veterans exchanged glances, full of deeper schemes. "It's just troubling a rookie, there are plenty of ways." On the way back, Edward hesitated before speaking up. "Ethan, is that a gunshot wound on your shoulder?" I immediately responded, "No." Thinking to myself, it was from shrapnel, nothing to do with bullets. Edward didn't ask further, and the two of us returned to the dorm, one following the other. Upon entering the room, everyone remained seated on their stools, maintaining the same posture as when we left, their gazes intense and fixed on us. I acted as if nothing was amiss and went about my business. Kevin, however, couldn't sit still, keeping a vigilant eye on every move I made, until I climbed into my bunk. He seemed to breathe a sigh of relief as if he had survived a close call. Until I climbed into my bunk. He seemed to breathe a sigh of relief as if he had survived a close call. Suddenly, Edward let out a heavy sigh, ringing like an alarm bell in Kevin and James' minds. "If you're going to do something, just say it, stop sighing and keeping us in suspense." Edward was puzzled, wondering what he had done to provoke such a reaction. I spoke without even opening my eyes. "Not washing feet, going to sleep tonight." Kevin and James felt murderous. Over the next few days, the training schedule was packed from dawn to dusk. The younger soldiers and us were like two sides of a river, hardly interacting as if we were non-existent. Besides the cleaning duties which they reluctantly took over, no one mentioned the foot washing again. The veterans seemed to have temporarily breathed a sigh of relief. One day, as Edward and I were doing push-ups and reciting vocabulary, we heard someone calling us. We looked up to see a skinny figure darting towards us. Edward, shocked, got up from the ground. "Henry, what are you doing here? It hasn't even been a month, how did you lose so much weight?" Henry spoke with a mix of distress and exhaustion. "The artillery battalion's workload is heavy, it feels like the guns are attached to my body." "And the psychological torment from the veterans?" "I'm scared to even speak loudly in the dorm." I patted his shoulder. "Don't let others affect you. Focus on your goal, remember why you came here." Henry had an epiphany. "I want to be a special forces soldier." I continued, "The people around you now are just your temporary teammates. There's no need to be overly friendly, everyone should be treated as equals." He gave me a thumbs up before returning to his duties. 2 months passed, and I became the top performer in all categories in our platoon. Initially, some veterans couldn't accept this and tried to find faults with me, but to no avail. They had no choice but to target Edward, who unfortunately found himself frequently in trouble. As the annual simulation exercise approached, everyone had to participate. The reconnaissance platoon was divided into teams for a mock operation. Each platoon would include 6 to 8 rookies, and teams were formed by drawing lots, with each team consisting of 5 to 6 members and set to compete against each other. Each team was to exchange a hostage with the enemy team, with the remaining members free to strategize for either ambush or defense. The first team to rescue their hostage would be declared the winner. During the draw, the veterans prayed not to end up with the rookies. As luck would have it, Kevin and James ended up in my team during the draw. They were devastated. Throughout the task assignment, I suggested I could scout the enemy's base due to my skills, but this was met with resistance. Just follow the orders, rookie. Don't get ahead of yourself, they said, and I was assigned to an ambush role. The mission location was in the hills, about 1,000 meters between the opposing bases, marked by tents. As we were adjusting our radios, I overheard a veteran from the next tent berating his team, useless. Can't you even do this right? You'll drag us down during the real exercise. The rookies were too intimidated to respond. Coincidentally, Edward was in that team, but given his performance in the previous physical test, he was actually more capable than the complaining veteran. Edward chose to ignore the veteran's words. In our group, roles were assigned. Kevin was tasked with reconnaissance, James was to assist him, and they both were responsible for rescuing the hostage. I was assigned to ambush near the campsite. And another veteran from a different class was tasked with guarding the enemy's hostage, showing slight dissatisfaction. Guard duty is tedious and thankless. If the hostage is lost, the guard is the first to be blamed. However, the veteran simply scowled, holding his rifle with visible discontent, and stood guard. After exchanging hostages, we headed to our respective camps. Along the way, the assignments were explained, and I received a particular glance, acknowledging my recent commendable performance. Kevin, probably feeling overconfident from his previous solo performances, didn't say anything. This time teamwork was crucial. As the competition began, I found a densely branched tree and quickly climbed up, coiling one leg around the trunk and strapping branches to the other leg. The guard was momentarily stunned, muttering, "Is he a reincarnated mountain tiger? How does he climb so quickly?" Typically, to ensure success, those in ambush roles are positioned relatively far from the camp, but I settled just outside our doorstep. The veteran thought to warn me but then figured that if the hostage were lost, he could blame me, so everyone proceeded with their own motives. I used my Hawkeye skill from atop the tree to monitor the movements at the enemy camp. They dispatched 2 people towards our direction, including a skilled sniper who took a high vantage point. As we were about to encounter the enemy scouts, the veteran covering them shot Kevin directly. Kevin, seeing the smoke rising from his shoulder, realized he was eliminated. Furiously, he threw his helmet to the ground, clutching the radio. "What's going on with everyone? Ethan, you're supposed to be ambushing, you should be within range to cover me. And James, you were supposed to cover me, I was supposed to rescue the hostage. Now look, I'm dead." James, face grimy, was crawling on the ground, scouting the area. "They acted too quickly, I didn't see them coming. Ethan, cover me, I'm going for the rescue." I really didn't want to agree. But James was insistent on an answer, so I reluctantly grunted in acknowledgement. Suddenly, James heard a slight rustling in the grass. He looked up just as a pair of military boots approached slowly. He prepared to shoot when his hat felt like it was hit by a rock, and a puff of smoke appeared instantly. James, infuriated, punched the ground. "Damn, how did they act so fast? Ethan, weren't you supposed to cover me? How could you miss someone approaching me from so close?" I calmly responded, "You're nearly 500 meters away from me, are you sure I could cover you from here?" Despite knowing my point was valid, James stubbornly retorted, "Aren't you known for your shooting skills? You did that on purpose." I sighed, "Weren't you the ones who assigned me to ambush? Now you want me to cover? What exactly am I supposed to be doing?" Kevin felt I was deliberately undermining them. "You can't just throw a tantrum during a match when so many are involved." Another veteran from a different class couldn't stand listening anymore. While they found me somewhat arrogant, the way these two were shifting the blame was too much even for him. I turned off the radio, blocking out their incessant complaints, leaped from the tree, and advanced with my rifle in hand. The veteran behind me yelled for a while, but seeing my lack of response, they gave up in frustration. "Forget it, let it all go to hell." I walked over 100 meters, then paused, crouched by a tree root, and camouflaged myself with bushes as I positioned my rifle. With a bang, the opponent's scout stood frozen in place, frantically scanning the area ahead. "Where is the enemy hiding? How did I get shot?" He was completely unaware of his exposure. The opponent's cover, positioned less than 100 meters behind the scout, also jumped in shock. Despite their experience as veterans, they were in perfect sync. The covering operative quickly changed routes, transforming from a scout to an active protector, allowing the original ambush to expand its range from a high point. I took a clean shot straight to his heart, leaving the ambusher dumbfounded. Didn't I already take down 2 of them? Could all 4 of them have mobilized? It was key that someone had managed to approach their territory undetected. As an ambusher, he was shocked that he hadn't seen this coming. He racked his brain but couldn't figure out how such a skilled opponent had suddenly appeared. The guard, hearing the gunfire so close, panicked and emerged from the tent. He found himself face to face with the ambusher, both confused. Seeing the smoke from the ambusher's position, the guard's brow furrowed. How did you get taken out? The ambusher shook his head helplessly and spread his hands, adding to the guard's already high stress. At this time, Kevin and James, upon hearing the consecutive gunshots that took out two of their teammates, became somber. I knew he did it on purpose. This guy just wants to make sure we lose, but I have to admit, his shooting is impressive, grumbled one, reluctantly admiring my skill. The original covering position also adjusted their tactics, firing a couple of shots in my direction to distract me. The next second, as the cover operative's arms trembled, smoke engulfed him, and he was eliminated. Then, I boldly advanced toward their camp, passing right by him. The only thought in his mind was that I hadn't even considered him a threat. I am a top-ranked international mercenary. I've survived countless near-death experiences, been shot 3 times, and dragged myself with a nearly useless leg out of enemy headquarters. Carrying a hostage out of the enemy's base in this competition is just child's play for me. If it weren't for fear of winning too dramatically and frightening everyone, I would have sat in a tree and picked off all 4 opponents with ease. Being too strong can sometimes be a burden. I stealthily approached the enemy camp like a ghost and neutralized the remaining guard with a single shot. They didn't even realize what hit them. I entered the building, untied the hostage, and looked up at the drone, saying, "Mission accomplished, right?" Seconds later, the drone responded, "The winner of this exercise is the red team." Kevin and James, who had been the first to lose their teammates, still felt as if they were dreaming. Did we just win by doing nothing? Both veterans and new recruits who hadn't participated watched the live footage captured by the drones. They applauded excitedly. That's what a true all-around soldier looks like. Capable of reconnaissance, ambush, and even demolition. Some older soldiers felt bitter, criticizing my lack of team spirit. This was supposed to be a team effort, and he just showed off without considering others. Edward grimly noted, did those teammates care about him? They blamed him right after losing, without any self-reflection. A few old soldiers muttered, even if you're put in a role you're not familiar with, obeying orders is a soldier's duty. Edward scoffed, there was no designated leader or command. This casual exercise was about everyone finding their role. When they failed, they looked for excuses to blame others. Typical. When I returned, everyone was tense, looking at me with an air of restraint. Kevin and James were no exception. Finally, Kevin mustered the courage to awkwardly apologize. Sorry about that. I was out of line earlier. Realizing he was looking for a way to ease the tension, I nodded, next time, let's work together and utilize everyone's strengths. Kevin was prepared for a cold response and was taken aback by my amicable reply. Kevin urgently asked, how did you aim at their ambusher? The difference in distance between you two was significant. I anticipated his movements in advance and timed it perfectly, I replied. James exclaimed, that's a bit exaggerated, isn't it? Besides our team, the best result from other groups was taking down 2 people. A 4-kill achievement like mine is quite rare in the reconnaissance platoon. Through this incident, Kevin and James found a way to bridge the gap with me, their initial bias gradually turning into admiration, and eventually into envy. From then on, every day during free time, I always had a bunch of followers from our dorm. People from other classes couldn't stand it, muttering in the dorm, everyone's tired enough already. How come Ethan's still creating such intense competition? Upstairs, someone poked their head out. I heard that the selection for Special Forces is in 3 months, right after the military exercise, isn't it? Yes, I also heard that our platoon has 5 spots. In previous years, it was rare for a platoon to get even 1 or 2 spots. This year, those 5 spots have got everyone eager to try. Then the squad leader came over, always on your phones during rest time. Better go to sleep early tonight, you can dream about anything first. Now, under my lead, many veterans have joined my fan club. At first, they felt it was beneath their dignity. Gradually, a bunch of tough talkers became sweet talkers. One of them said, I never realized that my posture for exerting force has been wrong for over a decade, no wonder my knees are slightly deformed. Another person was shocked, you're always among the top 3 runners even though your posture is wrong? Are you kidding us? The man proudly said, with the new posture I'm practicing now, I can shave off a second per 100 meters. Normally, after dinner, the instructor would take the recruits for night training, but later he discovered a group of people following my routine. Seeing that I was also devising specialized training plans for them based on their weaknesses, he just let me take over. Tonight, Philip and Martin just returned from a business trip and decided to check on their troops first, but found the training ground empty. Philip squinted his eyes, isn't this supposed to be training time, Martin? Martin, with furrowed brows, immediately called platoon leader Luke Anderson, isn't it training time now? Why is there no one on the training ground? Luke hesitantly replied, sir, they said they'd be at the back hill shooting range for today's shooting practice. Martin's brows twitched, you say should? You don't know what your soldiers are doing? What kind of platoon leader are you? Report to the commander, I was wrong. I'll take you to the shooting range right now. Philip, catching a grip, smiled but his voice betrayed a hint of schadenfreude. Ah, now soldiers can train themselves? And your reconnaissance soldiers are practicing shooting in the dark? Thinking of our sniper platoon where any soldier could achieve perfect scores within 200 meters. Since he heard that the shooting level of the reconnaissance platoon was still at 100 meters, he guessed that such a short period couldn't yield much improvement. Luke, in a flurry, rushed over. Only to be met with Martin's stern face. You better give me a reasonable explanation for this. I want a 10,000-word reflection paper by tomorrow afternoon. So Luke, who barely graduated from primary school, had a face uglier than if he were crying. From a distance, they saw no lights at the back hill shooting range, so they immediately called George. What's going on? Aren't you guys supposed to be at the range? Why aren't the lights on? George responded, we are here. We're practicing night shooting. Philip, sarcastically, that's ridiculous, I've been a soldier for so long and I've never heard of night shooting without lights. Martin, speechless, walked a few steps then suddenly heard a series of gunshots. A moment later, someone reported, 2 groups, 200-meter night shooting, all bullseyes. The approaching trio stopped in their tracks, stunned. They hadn't misheard, right? Night shooting without lights, at a distance of 200 meters, and they all hit bullseyes? Philip rushed over first and saw me using binoculars to count. When I noticed Philip approaching, I handed him the binoculars. Skeptical, Philip looked through the binoculars at the distant targets, where each of the 5 bullseyes had a bullet hole. You shot these? I don't believe it. I replied coolly, Commander Philip, we've only recently started practicing nighttime shooting, so the accuracy might not be very high. Philip thought, are you just kidding me? All bullseyes, you talk about accuracy not being very high. Martin, who had been frowning all the way, now couldn't hide his smile. Philip hesitated for a moment, then said, I didn't see you change shooters and shoot again. Let's see it now. Martin said, Lieutenant Philip is quite excited. While the commander of the sharpshooters is here, let him give you some good guidance. This is a great opportunity to learn from the best. Seeing his own commander agree, I swapped in another group and replaced the target papers. Ready, I announced. Everyone adjusted their grip on their rifles smoothly and uniformly, flawless even in Martin's eyes. At my command, fire. All fired at once. Each of the 5 targets had a bullet hole precisely in the red center. Martin's expression grew even more complex looking at me. Beside him, Philip was visibly distressed, feeling uneasy as we were potentially surpassing his sharpshooter unit. Commander Philip then muttered an excuse about having something else to do and hurried off. Martin glanced at the disciplined soldiers, each with a water bottle hanging from their arms and rifles. Did you train everyone to do this? Martin asked me. I nodded, yes. To ensure arm strength and aiming stability. Then he chuckled, Ethan, from now on, you will serve as an assistant instructor and work with Luke to plan the upcoming training. Philip returned to his sharpshooter unit to find only a few loosely training and even some chasing each other below the windows. Furious, he rang the emergency assembly bell. This is not a retirement home, you're not here to relax. No organization, no discipline. Where are your results? Your training? Your shooting skills? His voice rose with each question, intimidating everyone. Tonight, anyone who doesn't hit the bullseye at 200 meters will run 20 kilometers with a load, not just 10. Everyone's eyes widened in terror, internally screaming. What got into the commander today? Uneasily, they picked up their rifles, waiting anxiously. That's when Philip thought of the scouts, with their water bottles hanging while waiting. Why just stand there during the wait? Can't you think of practicing basic skills? This time, everyone was too afraid to even breathe too loudly, lest the commander next accuse them of sounding like alarm clocks. The veterans managed 10 rings at 200 meters, but the recruits either hit 9 rings or hesitated too long to shoot. In any case, they couldn't escape a scolding and eventually trudged gloomily for a 20-kilometer run around the hill. Over the next week or so, the usually busy Commander Philip began to personally train the troops. Today at noon, just after Edward and I left the cafeteria, we encountered a disheveled Miles. He, seeing us, rushed over and burst into tears. Ethan, you have no idea what I've been through. I awkwardly responded, sharpshooter unit's training is intense, but it shouldn't be draining you this much, right? At these words, Miles cried even harder. Intense? It's the last straw that breaks the camel's back. Miles sighed, lately, our commander has been on edge, pushing us with arm training exercises. At midnight, he drags us out for shooting practice. It's pitch black, we can't see anything. Training us to shoot in these conditions, has he gone mad? Edward glanced at me cautiously, and I exchanged an awkward look with him. But Miles continued his relentless complaining. Look at my abs, they've gone from 6 to 8 packs. I used to suffer from insomnia, now I can't get enough sleep at all. It's miserable. The more Edward listened, the harder it became to suppress his laughter, which eventually burst out. Miles roared, "Edward, what do you mean by this? Are you mocking me? I'm so pitiful, don't you have any conscience?" Edward quickly raised his hands over his head. No, absolutely not. I'm not mocking you. I'm just sympathetic, didn't expect the stimulus on your commander to be so severe. Then he burst into laughter again. Miles finally sensed something was off. Do you know something? Edward then recounted everything that had happened that night in full detail. After hearing it, Miles looked at me with a murderous gaze, outraged. "So it was you guys who stabbed me in the back." His anger only intensified, and as he left, he still looked back reluctantly. Miles, the loudspeaker, spread the news about our training with everyone. They even thought about forming a group to visit our scout unit to see it firsthand. Gradually, this news spread to other units in the forces. Today, I took the new training plan to Martin. Martin glanced at it and threw the plan back at me. "Go redo this." I paused. "This plan is tailored for the upcoming exercise competition." Martin looked at me with complex eyes. "Go ahead." I laid the training plan in front of Martin again, pointing to various training items while explaining their relevance to the competition. Initially, Martin listened disinterestedly, not seeing much value in my training plan. But as I continued, his expression turned serious. By the end, he was nodding vigorously, almost ready to applaud. "What you said is excellent, I hadn't considered that." He then summarized, "All members' physical indices are categorized according to different physical conditions. For example, Edward's sniping is top-notch, which can be used to enhance precision. The training will also increase arm strength." Martin then patted my shoulder and said, "We'll train according to your plan. You've worked hard during this period." I immediately stood at attention and saluted Martin. "It's no trouble." Just after I left the office, Martin received a call from another unit. "Hey Martin, how's it going?" Martin responded with a smile. "Eric, just spit it out, what do you need?" The other side's Eric Johnson chuckled a couple of times, not feeling awkward at all. "I hear your unit has recently produced a quite impressive rookie." Martin's eyes crinkled with amusement. "Oh, has that news reached you already?" Eric on the other end laughed. "You're quite the actor. I just want to bring my guys over to see your training scale and learn a bit." "Sure, but let me know before you come so I can arrange it." However, Eric showed up that very afternoon. "Eric, why didn't you give me a heads up before coming?" While confident in his troops, Martin still wanted to showcase the best and most stable performers for visitors from other units. Martin, sensing this, did not give the other party any opportunity to exploit. He thought Eric Johnson had come alone, but upon reaching the downstairs, he discovered that Eric had brought a dozen people with him. Everyone neatly saluted Martin. "Good day, Lieutenant Martin." Martin's mouth twitched slightly. "What's this?" Eric hurriedly explained, "Well, since we're here to learn, we thought a few bouts of sparring were in order." Leaving Martin momentarily speechless. At that time, I was leading them through a modified set of military boxing exercises that incorporated some techniques from Tai Chi, pairing up in twos for sparring. The moment Martin pushed the door open, the training room was a whirlwind of activity, with a plethora of stances and movements. Even Martin, who was mentally prepared, felt overwhelmed. Beside him, Eric burst into laughter. "This isn't combat, this is more like a circus show." I immediately reported, "Lieutenant Martin, this indeed is combat training, though with some modifications." Martin had seen my training plan before but did not expect the techniques to be so varied. Granting you the role of assistant instructor wasn't a license for tomfoolery. "Look at these soldiers, their postures wouldn't hold up anywhere," he said. I explained, "That was just them loosening up, the real combat training isn't like what you just saw." Seeing so many people, I had guessed their intention might be to mock us or, like Philip previously, to scout our training methods. Eric had brought over a dozen new recruits, along with some faces I recognized. David, amidst the crowd, made exaggerated facial expressions at me. Eric probably thought that the rumors about us were just exaggerated hearsay and decided to see for himself to avoid being duped by our supposed circus act. At this point, Martin was frowning at me. "You'd better have a good explanation for this." I'm not fond of wasting time on explanations, actions speak louder than words. Before Martin could respond, Eric jumped in, "Then show us, let's see the results." Everyone, seeing an opportunity to perform, was eager to prove themselves. I'll go, let me." Finally, Eric scanned the crowd and picked Edward and James, who looked moderately built and slightly frail compared to others. The others had to suppress their laughter at this lineup. His choices indeed had the discerning eye, picking Ethan's closest disciples right off the bat. I double-checked with him. "Are you sure you want to choose these two?" Eric nodded. "Yes, that's my choice." "Any problems?" I shook my head, and everyone made space for the two. The two commanders sat with contrasting expressions, one impassive, the other visibly amused. I stood beside Martin and announced the start of the match. Both maintained combat stances, but as Edward threw a punch at James, James used a shape-shifting position to dodge, and while retreating, he blocked Edward's leg while simultaneously throwing a punch. It looked like a sure hit to any onlooker. But Edward, anticipating his move, countered faster with a right hook to James's abdomen. James attempted to counter, but Edward's swift movement sent him flying backward, crashing heavily to the ground. Everyone was stunned. A member of the reconnaissance team excitedly praised, the anticipation of that move was brilliant, truly worthy of being the top disciple. Martin and Eric were both taken aback, not expecting this outcome at all. Martin's expression softened slightly, relieved that his unit hadn't been embarrassed. Eric, now looking at me with a new level of respect, turned to Martin, looks like your soldiers are indeed impressive under Ethan's lead. How about letting our soldiers spar with yours? Martin swept a glance at the other side, each person strong and well prepared. Good. Before the military exercise, let's size each other up. Eric's eyes fixated on me, and I returned the look with a smile. Commander Son, this is a training session, and I'm just an assistant instructor, isn't it inappropriate? Yet Eric narrowed his eyes and said, I just want to see how capable you are. Are you planning to keep hiding your skills until the end? I responded, since it's a friendly spar, how about letting others go first and I join in last? With that said, he no longer insisted. So, each side fielded their strong contenders. Edward didn't even leave the stage, he stayed right there. His opponent was an old acquaintance, now labeled as the strongest newcomer of the artillery unit, David. As Edward and David locked eyes, David blew him a kiss. With George declaring the start of the match, both showcased their best combat forms. David's punches were as fast and accurate as his personality, aiming straight for Edward's shoulder with rapid strikes. In the split second that David's fist approached, Edward swiftly ducked down, his elbow aiming at the approaching arm, striking with force. Caught off guard, David's punch trajectory was involuntarily altered. Then Edward's next punch hit straight to his waist. David stepped back, but still got hit solidly. His face contorting in pain, thinking, has Edward become this strong? Edward gave a slight smile, just average, but enough to handle you. Provoked, David threw punches faster and more fiercely. Initially, Edward focused on dodging, but as David's stamina waned, Edward found the right moment and kicked at his legs. Back and forth they went for 2.5 minutes. Edward found the right moment and kicked at his legs. Back and forth they went for 2.5 minutes. David fell to the ground, exhausted and seeing stars, while Edward was also gasping for breath. Eric's expression changed, seeing that Edward could indeed predict the opponent's moves accurately and respond in a fraction of a second. Eric then called 2 more people to spar with soldiers from the reconnaissance unit. The opponents rarely initiated attacks, responding to moves as they came, then unexpectedly striking when unguarded, proving that what seemed coincidental was actually skillful planning. All 3 spars ended with the artillery unit's defeat. Those who sparred sat aside, sighing and massaging their bruised arms and shoulders. At that moment, the expressions on Eric and Martin's faces flipped. History always seemed to repeat itself, much like Philip's previous visit. Eric looked at me and said, as an instructor, you must be quite more capable than them, right? Martin patted my shoulder happily, since Commander Song is curious, why don't you show them, let them give up completely? I replied, alright, the rest of you, come at me together. This statement displeased many. Did I hear that wrong? You want all of us to come at you together? Isn't that a bit too arrogant? I said, one by one is a waste of time, let's settle this quickly. I meant to add not to interrupt the upcoming training schedule. But seeing everyone's stern faces, I swallowed the rest of my words. Eric, however, scoffed, alright, since you're so confident. We'll just be your sparring partners then. There are many of us, be careful not to hurt Ethan, it's just a spar. With George announcing the start, 7 from the artillery unit surrounded me. Yet even though they were right in front of me, they couldn't even touch my arm. I moved like a shadow, elusive, as several punched at me simultaneously. I responded with exceptional explosive power, grabbing one person's arm and forcefully flipping over. In less than a second, I broke through the encirclement. And I even managed to use one of the artillerymen as a shield, sticking closely behind him. I pretended to attack, and though it was 7 against 1, I handled them with ease. In less than a minute, all 7 were down. Even Eric couldn't utter a word of objection this time. Watching his soldiers lying in disarray on the ground, sighing, and I was merely sweating. Eric stood up abruptly, and Martin, thinking he was about to vent his anger on me. Martin quickly stood in front of me, saying, Commander Eric has already stated, win or lose, it's just a sparring match. What are you doing? Instead, Eric bypassed Martin and faced me directly, asking, Ethan, could you possibly come to our artillery unit to conduct a few classes? The room fell silent. What was happening? Was the commander of the artillery unit trying to poach me? No way, Ethan is our treasure, was the collective thought, marveling at how quickly their antagonist had switched sides. I looked awkwardly at Martin, and he, too, was astonished by Eric's change of heart. Eric clapped me on the shoulder and admitted, I initially doubted your abilities, but now, I sincerely hope you can come and conduct a few combat lessons for my soldiers. I thought to myself, that's quite a rapid change in attitude, recalling his earlier criticism likening our skills to a circus act. Even David was stunned, internally remarking, that's not what you said when you came. You were determined to knock Ethan down a peg or two. A few seconds later, Martin interjected, we'll have to see our training schedule. Ethan is currently an assistant instructor in control of all our training. Luke immediately added, yes, let's consider Ethan's upcoming commitments. But I suggested, if you're really keen to learn, you could leave a couple of your men here. Everyone was taken aback, is this what the army is? An exchange program? Yet Eric, perhaps fearing I might change my mind, quickly agreed, alright, let's do it your way. There was a moment of collective bafflement as everyone looked at one another. Eventually, they picked and chose who would stay, David, someone I knew well, and another who was proficient in combat. Eric, with his ulterior motives, thought since David knew me, I would naturally take special care in teaching someone familiar. So, they arranged for these soldiers to stay and learn, in hopes of enhancing their unit's combat effectiveness by any means necessary. Martin, out of politeness, allowed this arrangement. When other units heard that such exchanges were possible, they too sent personnel to learn. Eventually, Henry, Miles, and David were all in my eclectic class, only this time with roles reversed. We were no longer training together as recruits, they were now my trainees. The annual military drill was about to start, and our overall strength had significantly improved. I had become a prominent figure at the base. The format and personnel for the drill were finalized, and Martin held a major meeting with the reconnaissance unit. This time, it's an all-army battlefield, even the cooks are included. This is a joint drill involving 4 corps, not a small event. The setting is vast, he announced. Everyone was excited about the grand scale of the drill. Some joked, I don't ask for much, just don't die too early. Let's not be cannon fodder right off the bat. Martin emphasized, don't anyone harbor any illusions or think that the drill doesn't concern you because you're just a low-ranking soldier. Quite the opposite, the true victory lies in the hands of soldiers like you. He continued to detail the format of the competition. Our 76th and 9th Corps will form the Red Army. You'll be issued bullets that emit red smoke and wear armbands with red markers. Our reconnaissance unit's first task is to scout and relay information to the command center. Everyone must follow the orders from the command center. After Martin finished introducing everything, he pointedly said, I know some of you are highly capable, but remember, doing your duty means following orders. Edward quietly elbowed me and whispered, he's talking about you. I squeezed out through gritted teeth, shut up. On the night before the competition started, everyone was in the barracks packing their bags. We had to get up at 4 a.m. to head to the competition site, with all guns and other weapons being collected beforehand and issued at the site the next day. Nervously, Kevin said, they say live exercises won't cause physical harm, but what if someone gets injured? James joked, you get bruises and sprains from regular training, let alone a competition of this scale. I patiently explained, don't worry, usually blank rounds are used, which don't cause actual harm. Tanks and other heavy machinery use modified soft shells, which won't result in casualties either. At today's meeting, Martin also mentioned the soft shells, but they didn't really understand what that meant. You can think of a soft shell as a type of sponge ball filled with colored smoke and powder that instantly triggers a switch upon impact, releasing the powder and smoke. If you are within that range, you're eliminated. At 4 a.m., everyone groggily boarded the helicopter and we arrived at the site around 6 a.m. Looking around, the area was filled with forests and low hills, covered in green vegetation and grass over a person's height. Edward, attending his first military drill, excitedly said, this really seems like a great place to hide. First, we were assigned our weapons and then given enough rations for the next 3 days. I weighed the gun I received and felt that its stability was off. I found the person in charge and asked, could you exchange this gun for me? It has an issue. The person glanced at the gun's serial number and said, just wait a bit, I need to fetch a replacement from the warehouse. Edward's gun was also problematic. I noticed these were older models, not the new ones currently in use. Excuse me, both of our guns are outdated. Are all the new models already distributed? Why do we have old models? The staff member replied impatiently, cutting me off, we distribute them uniformly. What's with the criticism? If there's an issue with the gun, we'll replace it. Cut the unnecessary talk. Edward tried to argue but I stopped him, let it go, it doesn't matter. Wait for them to bring back the replacements. The registrar said they needed to fetch guns from the warehouse and took our problematic guns with them. We waited quite a while, but they didn't return. Not only did we not get any guns, but the drill had already started. I asked another staff member, excuse me, they went to the warehouse to fetch guns, when will they be back? Without looking up, the staff member replied, a round trip to the warehouse takes 10 minutes, it's only been 5. Your colleague is still urging them on. Edward was pacing nervously. It was his first military drill, he was armed with plenty of ammunition and grenades, but crucially, no gun. What a joke, he thought. He was originally hoping not to be cannon fodder right at the start, but now it seemed he was rushing into it. Another unit urged us, hurry up, stop dawdling, we've been waiting for you for ages. I decided to pull Edward aside and said, let's go. Edward looked at me in surprise, we're really going into the drill unarmed? I calmly responded, do you have a better idea? Edward fell silent, obviously without a solution. Our own vehicle was filled with our teammates. The instruction we received was to first reach a designated location and then, based on the situation, relay information back to the command center. The vehicle moved forward. Upon reaching the designated spot, I pulled Edward out of the vehicle. The others also took their positions, and no one seemed to notice that we were unarmed. Edward was restless the whole time. I said to him, remember, Edward, the outcome isn't determined from the start. Even without guns, we can still survive to the end. Edward pessimistically asked, what do we do then? Even if we spot the enemy, we can't engage. Each of us had 2 grenades, these were our last lifelines. The word give up doesn't exist in my dictionary, Ethan. I helped Edward camouflage himself using the surrounding weeds. Then I tore off an edge of my short sleeve, using the thread and grenades to set up an ambush. Edward hesitated, are we just going to sit here and wait for a rabbit to hit the trap? Isn't this a bit too silly? What do you know? It might seem foolish, but it's actually the most practical method. We waited there all day long, Edward even had a meal while we waited, yet we didn't see a soul. Our teammates from the same vehicle had each moved to their assigned locations and began to advance slowly. Only we remained motionless, seated like statues. It wasn't until late at night that 2 people slowly approached our position. I pointed at the 2 approaching figures, still some distance from our trap, and it looked like they might bypass it entirely. Edward looked excited at first, but then he felt the hair on his neck stand up. I casually picked up a stone from the ground and threw it near the trap. The stone rolled over the grass several times, creating the illusion of movement. As expected, the duo turned their direction toward the moving grass, but after observing for a while and seeing no further movement, they cautiously continued towards us. Suddenly, one of them felt a tightening around his lower leg. The next second, a grenade exploded right where they stood, covering them in red smoke. In the darkness, they looked like ghosts, frantically turning around with their guns drawn. I chuckled softly, let's go fishing. We walked up to the 2 blue soldiers who had been caught by the trap. You're both out, relax a bit. One of them frowned and said, it was your trap. Edward finally caught on and was thrilled. The man irritably asked, why make such a big show? Couldn't you have just shot us? I replied directly, with guns, it wouldn't have been this complicated. Aren't you here to deliver guns to us? The 2 were stunned, what do you mean? Are you trying to steal our guns? I smiled slightly, not just the guns, I want your armbands too. Both men, including Edward, looked at me dumbfounded. The adversary, annoyed, said, that's really low, you're crossing the line. I looked back at them. Often, the rules are there to be used. Hurry up and hand over the guns and armbands. Reluctantly and angrily, they handed over their guns and armbands. Then, we donned their blue armbands. With that, Edward and I confidently walked away. Edward, still in disbelief, remarked, we actually managed to get guns. I confidently said, what's a gun? Next, we need to figure out how to reach their headquarters. Meanwhile, the command center received a notification, Scout Platoon is missing 2 people, Ethan and Edward. Colonel Leon asked, have you tried other means of contact? Don't they have communication devices? The reply came, no devices, no contact yet. Colonel Leon somewhat casually remarked, then consider them eliminated. Exclude them from the next strategic deployment. Someone nearby shook their head in regret, how could they lose contact so quickly? What a pity. Colonel Leon curiously inquired, what's special about them? An aide quickly explained, recently, a rookie has emerged in the new recruits' ranks who is said to have abilities not inferior to those of special forces, including some unique moves of his own. Colonel Leon, upon hearing this, suddenly realized that this person sounded extraordinarily strong, even somewhat familiar, and then asked, is he a college student? After checking my records, someone replied, you guessed right. He joined the military right after his junior year of college. Quite impressive. However, Colonel Leon pondered thoughtfully, if it really is him, he wouldn't be eliminated so easily. I'm curious to see what kind of waves he can make. At this time, I was hiding our original red armbands with Edward and started reloading our ammunition. 1 red bullet, 1 blue bullet, alternating. Understand? Although Edward didn't understand, he knew that following my lead was the right choice. I weighed the gun in my hands. The enemy's weapons were much better than ours previously, they had less recoil and were more stable. Remember, the first bullet must be blue. That way, even if we encounter soldiers from the Blue Army, we can still muddle through. We walked cautiously until we spotted a nearby artillery unit. Edward asked, shall we approach now? I shook my head, not yet. It's too easy to be caught in friendly fire now. Let's wait. Suddenly, they received an order that seemed to direct them to fire towards a certain direction. Soon after, we ran towards the direction from which they were firing. The exchange of artillery suggested that the Red Army was more aggressive. The Blue Army's advancing line had to retreat by 500 meters. Now, I said, pulling a disheveled Edward with me, rushing towards the direction of the artillery unit. The opposition, seeing two figures suddenly appearing, asked, "Which unit are you guys from?" I responded, "We're from the infantry. We just ran away from the Red Army's artillery." They didn't think much of it and advised, "Quickly retreat to a safe place. This area is the enemy's minefield, and their artillery will bombard here soon." This gave us a perfect excuse to blend in with the Blue Army. Edward, incredulous, looked at me. My God, my heart was about to leap out of my chest. "You're a genius, Ethan." I nonchalantly replied, "This is just the first step. The enemy's camp has several bases, we must find the command center. Right now, this base is the Blue Army's armored base." As people bustled around, I walked with Edward, both of us holding guns, patrolling near the tents of the training base, just like other patrol soldiers. Throughout, Edward was visibly nervous. I reminded him to act naturally, act as if you're at home. The more cautious you are, the more likely you are to stand out. Edward was so nervous he nearly cried. "Isn't this the same as putting our heads under the enemy's gun? I'd like to be less nervous, but I just can't help it." Meanwhile, I moved with ease. Suddenly, someone called us over, "You two, come help move some stuff." The person opened a storage room filled with the enemy's ammunition, boxed up in the entire warehouse. Goodness, such an arsenal. "You two, move 5 boxes. They're running low on ammunition, you need to deliver these quickly." I immediately asked, "Which vehicle should we take?" Pointing to a jeep in front, the person instructed, "Drive this one, it's less conspicuous." I quickly agreed, "All right, just the two of us will handle it. You go attend to other things." The person glanced at me, advising, "Be careful, you know where it is, right?" "Don't worry, I know." As soon as the person left, I smiled at Edward, another great opportunity. I then tore off a long thread from my sleeve, wedged a grenade between 2 boxes, and tightly tied the other end of the string across the doorway. Anyone attempting to access the ammunition would inevitably trigger the string. Within a minute, we had safely retreated to the door. Edward asked, "How are you so skilled at this?" Instinctively, I almost said practice makes perfect, but I caught myself and instead said, "It's a survival skill." By then, other members of our red team who had chosen more stable routes were already heavily casualties. Kevin said worriedly, "Ethan just got off and got separated from us. What's his situation now?" Another team member from our reconnaissance platoon sighed, "His fate is hard to predict now. Just now, the enemy's artillery was so intense, it was difficult for us even to try to circle around." Kevin was initially enthusiastic, but reality quickly crushed his spirit. They seemed like reconnaissance soldiers, but one wrong move, and they were stepping into a minefield. Several teammates had already been eliminated this way, including James. Meanwhile, at the Red Army's command center, Colonel Leon was uneasy. The virtual display showed the enemy's advancing lines. "Have we not heard from the ambush squad yet?" The Red Army had recently sacrificed a squad as a decoy. At the same time, they had another relatively stable squad use the route opened by the decoy to break into the enemy's camp. However, what they stumbled upon was an armored base. They had just reached the vicinity of the base when they heard an explosion. A loud bang was followed by a rise of red smoke. Even the ambush squad was stunned, they hadn't fired their weapons. Could it be that someone else had attacked near the Blue Army's base? Soon after, they heard someone shouting, "The ammunition depot was blown up, everyone take cover." They had just set the trap, the perpetrators couldn't have gone far. Although it wasn't clear who had fired, this action turned them into targets. Fortunately, there was a nearby path for retreat, but the gunfire behind nearly ended them. Report, the Blue Army's armored base is under attack, the ammo depot must be completely destroyed, we don't know who acted. Colonel Leon, surprised, said, "Wasn't it you who acted? Could there be someone else?" The captain of the ambush squad was unclear but confirmed the red smoke. Colonel Leon muttered to himself, suspecting it could be Ethan. The squad members asked, "Did you send anyone else here?" Colonel Leon felt that, while it might be Ethan, the probability was too low to expect too much based on his previous identity. "Leave it for now, I'll send someone to cover your advance to the next base." At that moment, I was casually driving a vehicle from the blue base to another camp. Soon, we reached the next camp, which appeared to be an infantry camp, housing a few tents and looking unremarkable. Edward said thoughtfully, "This surely can't be the main base. Think about it, aren't command posts usually equipped with all sorts of high-tech electronics and large screens? Look around, there's nothing here. That tent over there looks like it could barely fit 2 people. How could a command post be in such a place?" He finished with an exaggerated expression towards me. I calmly reassured him, "You have some basis for your thoughts, but it's not that simple to determine." Edward immediately became more attentive. So this is the command post? They went against the grain and chose a narrow location? I rolled my eyes. Can you not react so dramatically? Can you judge whether this is a command center based on a few criteria? First, the number of patrolling personnel around and the reconnaissance situation nearby. Clearly, within 500 meters from the camp, we haven't seen many scouts, which means they don't place much importance here. Second, look for large signal receivers and generators. These two items are usually placed outside. Even if they are inside, the tents would be significantly larger, which isn't the case here. Before I could continue, a vehicle hurriedly drove in our direction. We quickly got out of the car and found a place to hide nearby. Quick, change the armbands. The incoming people are from the Red Army. Let's go out and recognize our own. As we stood up with hands raised above our heads, I greeted, "Hello, I'm also from the Red Army, didn't expect to meet here." The approaching soldier instinctively raised his gun, wary of someone suddenly claiming to be from the Red Army in such a desolate place. "Which battalion are you from? What's your name, and who is your commanding officer?" I answered all his questions. The ambush squad immediately reported this encounter to the command post. Upon hearing the name Ethan, the command post was alerted. Knowing that the recent attack on the armored camp's ammo depot was our doing, Colonel Leon breathed a sigh of relief, then asked if we wanted to proceed with the ambush squad. However, I refused. I have my own plans, I work better alone. The ambush squad leader, displeased, said, "Don't think that just because you destroyed an ammunition depot, you're something special. You must follow commands in the grand scheme of things." Suddenly, a voice from the radio interrupted him. "Michael, just let Ethan do as he pleases." Michael, shocked, responded, "Commander, you're letting him operate independently? What if he disrupts our plans?" Commander Leon pondered for a moment. "Give him a radio, and we'll keep in constant contact with Ethan." Michael's look at me grew more complex. What kind of background does this person have to make the usually strict Commander Leon act like this? Michael then had one of his men give me a radio. Afterward, I took Edward, who hardly dared to breathe, and we got into the car. Only after the car had disappeared did Tung Hao ask, "Commander Leon, what exactly is Ethan's background?" Commander Leon replied, "He's the top new recruit, made quite a name for himself in the recruit squad." Michael was taken aback. "Just that? He doesn't have something else?" "I don't believe you would give someone such leeway for no reason." Commander Leon chuckled, "That's all. But I am looking forward to seeing what he does next." Suddenly, a cold voice interjected. "Thank you all for your concern, I won't disappoint you." Commander Leon and Michael suddenly looked awkward. They had forgotten that the radio they gave me was tuned to their frequency. Commander Leon laughed awkwardly. "Ethan, I'm going to switch the channel now. Just report directly to me if there's any issue on your side." "Okay, Commander Leon." After putting down the radio, Commander Leon breathed a sigh of relief. "Why do I feel a bit guilty? I didn't say anything bad, did I?" Someone beside him remarked, "This Ethan really has some personality." I originally wanted to create a bit more chaos in that camp, but unexpectedly, when the ambush squad arrived, I just left the original camp to them. As we drove on, I suddenly said, "Shoot, I should have taken some grenades from them." Edward felt as if he were in a dream. How had we suddenly run into an ambush squad directly deployed by the commander? How had I directly refused to join them, becoming a person directly under the commander's supervision? I said regretfully, "We only have 2 grenades left, we have to make them count." Edward looked puzzled. "I suppose I don't have a say in this, right? After all, you are in command." As night fell again, I drove a car through various thickets without lights. Edward, buckling his seatbelt tightly and gripping the car door handles, exclaimed, "You dare to drive this fast without lights? Are you out of your mind?" I calmly replied, "We're short on time, and this level of darkness is no different from daylight for me." I had just heard someone mention that there might be another enemy base about a kilometer away. Edward watched in horror as I accelerated the car to 80 on the rough terrain, nearly dislodging his soul from his body. "I seriously suspect you're trying to kill me here. It feels like riding a terrifying roller coaster." Suddenly, I slammed on the brakes, causing Edward's face to turn pale. Just as he was about to shout, I quickly said, "Don't talk, there might be someone around." Then I opened the car door, using my eagle-eye ability to peer 3 kilometers away, indeed spotting a camp. Despite it being the early hours of the morning, the camp was brightly lit, bustling with people, and even scouts were scattered up to a kilometer away. I chuckled and said, "Looks like I found it." Edward, thrilled, asked, "Could it be their main base? Shall we attack now?" I shook my head, "Not yet, let's wait a bit longer." So, Edward found a spot and casually started eating some compressed biscuits from his pocket. I commented, smiling, "You really do have a good attitude." By then, Edward's mindset had undergone a significant change. I've made peace with it. I was too afraid before, overthinking everything. If I consider that I've already died once and this life is borrowed, then I can face death calmly. I gave Edward a thumbs up. "Nice one. Meanwhile, the Red Army was steadily retreating. Although the enemy had lost an ammunition depot, they quickly adjusted their strategy. The Blue Army utilized a massive infantry incursion from the periphery and directly evacuated 2 camps, adopting a feint strategy to draw the Red Army's firepower. Indeed, the Red Army did not anticipate this maneuver, charging at the bait left by the Blue Army and consequently getting their connection with the main force severed. The Blue Army's infantry, like countless tiny bullets, targeted their headquarters, despite the camouflaging of 2 camps. Discovering the main base was only a matter of time. From time to time, I could hear about the Red Army's current plight through my headset. Commander Leon contacted me. Ethan, how are things on your end? I responded that I might have located the Blue Army's headquarters. After hearing news of retreat all day, Commander Leon finally breathed a sigh of relief. The headquarters is yours to take, can you handle it? I'll do my best. Commander Leon's voice suddenly became anxious. Ethan, you must give it your all. I've sent an ambush squad to support you, they will follow your commands. Upon hearing others were coming, I felt a headache coming on. I prefer to operate alone. Commander Leon and his team tallied up the remaining forces. They only had about a quarter of their original number left, and the situation for the Blue Army wasn't much better. Apart from me and the ambush squad, there were a few other squads also steadily advancing toward the Blue Army's headquarters. However, on their way, they suffered several surprise attacks, and very few made it to the Blue Army headquarters. All hopes were now pinned on me. Ethan, how are things with you? He waited for a response to report the current situation, but all went silent. Commander Leon thought despairingly, are we really going to lose? At this time, I was putting on a blue armband with Edward and openly walked towards the Blue Army headquarters. Being a mix of 2 military zones with many unfamiliar faces, we didn't attract anyone's attention. But upon entering the headquarters, we found extremely tight security. 2 rows of neatly arranged soldiers stood guard in front of a core tent, blocking it completely. Even patrol personnel could only go as far as the tents in front of them before having to turn back. I thought to myself, we need to find a way to get inside, or at least get a bullet or shell inside. Assessing our remaining 2 grenades, I knew we had to make a last-ditch effort with them. But first, we had to make sure how many people were inside the tent and that I could neutralize them within seconds. I wanted to report the current situation to Commander Leon, but after picking up the radio, I realized that a signal jammer was blocking all devices without a special chip. It seemed I was on my own. I then tore off 2 strips of cloth from my shirt, setting 1 grenade near the ammunition storage. I handed one end of the cloth to Edward and placed another grenade near the main entrance. With only 2 grenades left, we had to use them to potentially draw guards away from the headquarters entrance. I still had 2 smoke grenades left in my possession. Edward, realizing the critical role he played with the 2 threads in his hands, began to tremble nervously. I quickly reassured him, don't overthink it, just wait for my signal. Then, using the pretext of inspecting vehicle parts, I climbed to a vantage point and peered through a gap in the door, getting a clear view of the tent's interior. There were 5 people inside, 1 stood at the entrance holding a gun, likely a guard. Of the remaining 4, 1 wore a cap, and the rank on his shoulder indicated he was the target of our mission. After confirming the target, I moved close to the tent and signaled to Edward. He pulled the threads one after the other, setting off both grenades simultaneously, causing chaos in the small base. Everyone be careful, we're under attack. Protect the headquarters at all costs, and shoot anyone who gets close. In the next second, as everyone scrambled to block the entrance, thick white smoke billowed in front of the headquarters. Damn, they're making their move with all this white smoke. Where's that bastard? Keep the doors secure, shoot anyone who enters. While everyone was panicking at the entrance, I had already changed tactics, using the smoke from the smoke grenades to obscure their vision. I circled to the side of the tent and slipped the barrel of my gun through a slit, aiming directly at the enemy commander. As the gun fired, time seemed to stop. Inside the command tent, shouts erupted, the commander has been attacked, we've lost. Where are they? Who attacked? How could so many of you not see the attacker? At this moment, I switched to a red armband unnoticed and brazenly walked up to the crowd, waving my hand flamboyantly, hello everyone. Instantly, dozens of guns and just as many eyes, sharp enough to kill, turned towards me. The Blue Army's commander, who had been attacked, emerged from the tent. Was it you who made the move? I nodded. What's your name? I declared boldly, I am Ethan Quinn from the 76th Group Army's Reconnaissance Platoon. The commander repeated this somewhat familiar name and then, shocked, looked up. Did you come here to attack alone? I replied, yes. The expressions of everyone shifted from shock to horror. You came in alone? I waved to Edward, who was still hidden behind the vehicle. Not alone, I have a comrade. Everyone had expected Ethan's comrade to be a veteran who had made a name in previous competitions, but instead, they saw someone who seemed rather timid. The Blue Army's commander chuckled, well done. I thought Leon was going to lose to me again this year, like last year, but it turns out he had an ace up his sleeve, training 2 elite soldiers to infiltrate my headquarters. Meanwhile, the Red Army's headquarters was under attack from both sides. Report to the commander, our artillery platoon has also fallen, only 3 left. Report, our dispatched scouts are also nearly wiped out, the enemy's firepower is too strong, their line is pushing hard, and they're about to reach our gates. Commander Leon felt as if a time bomb had been installed in his head, every update exploding like a bombshell. Can we get in touch with Ethan? How about the other ambush squad? His subordinate, panicking, said, Commander, they were just captured by the enemy and have been taken as hostages. The commander slammed his fist on the table, fight on, even if it means going down fighting, Thomas must see our spirit. Do as I say, send the remaining tanks to location 3. A cluster of red flares suddenly lit up the sky, stunning everyone. His subordinate urgently called Commander Leon outside. Squinting at the flares, Leon mused, what's happening? Aren't we out of men? Could it be Ethan? It was impossible. Commander Leon even dismissed his own thought, after so many years of battling this opponent, he knew the enemy would have heavily guarded the headquarters. He had even learned from an accidental discovery last time that the enemy had laid a complex network of scouts around their base. Ethan, those two couldn't possibly have broken through without any support. Could it be Michael found a way? As they were completely confused, Commander Leon's phone rang. It was expectedly a call from Commander Thomas. Leon, you really pulled a fast one on me today. Pretending to know less than he did, Leon chuckled, Thomas, I told you not to underestimate me. I prepared my trump card this year. Commander Thomas grunted displeasure, I'm curious, how did your soldiers break through all the encirclements and directly enter my headquarters? You had no support, those two couldn't have just appeared, right? Knowing for sure now, Commander Leon, realizing it was indeed Ethan and Edward who had turned the tide, laughed heartily, relishing their strategic secrecy. But then, it seemed Thomas had moved to a quieter spot, his voice lowering significantly, is that Ethan the one? Leon sternly confirmed, it is. Upon hearing this, Commander Thomas's tone deepened significantly, I didn't realize that guy was so powerful. Seems like your victory this year had a bit of luck. Hearing this, Commander Leon's face turned green, what do you mean, Thomas? Ethan reaching your headquarters and taking you out was all under my command. Don't trivialize my capabilities, alright? Commander Thomas spoke with a mocking smile, a mercenary ranked 7th internationally, capable of decimating cities single-handedly. Do you really think him finding our Blue Army headquarters had anything to do with your strategies? Commander Leon was left speechless, cornered by his remark. Yet, he stubbornly responded, luck is also a form of strength. Who else but Ethan chose to join us? The old rule, you owe me 2 good bottles of wine. This time, Commander Thomas was speechless. The others, upon seeing the signal flare in the sky, were also baffled, especially those Red Army soldiers who had been eliminated earlier. They excitedly cheered inside the base. Ah, we've turned the tide against the wind. The exercise has ended early, not even 3 days in. It feels like everyone from our platoon has nearly gathered here. Martin lamented, I was hoping to let everyone get eliminated later, not to meet up early at the base. But as soon as I arrived, I found you all here. Kevin said helplessly, no way around it, us scouts being on the front lines tend to be the first to go. After looking around for a while and still not seeing Ethan and Edward, they must still be alive. James said enviously, look how involved they are, surviving till now and basically winning by lying down. Someone suddenly remarked, with Ethan being so formidable, could it be that he was the one who eliminated the Blue Army's commander? Laughter erupted around them, alright, keep your jokes within limits. Ethan is indeed formidable, but what you just said sounds like a fantasy, doesn't it? Only Martin looked profoundly unsettled. After the game, the Red and Blue armies returned to their designated areas. Suddenly, an SUV drove up from afar. Everyone looked in its direction, who's that? Such a grand entrance. Judging by the license plate, it seems to be from another military region. Are they here to challenge us because they can't accept defeat? Standing in front of the formations, Commander Leon Grant also looked displeased at the car that abruptly drove up to his home ground, isn't this a bit too much like stealing the spotlight? Suddenly, the passenger and rear doors opened simultaneously. Everyone eagerly wanted to see who these scene stealers were. To their surprise, it was 2 familiar faces, Ethan and Edward. What's this? Are they defecting? A colleague slapped him, can't you think of something positive? Martin was also shocked to see me. Following that, Thomas stepped out from the other rear door. I and Edward stood in line and saluted Leon, reporting our tardiness due to the journey. Leon's expression wasn't very pleasant, Thomas deliberately sending the men back seemed like a demonstration. Ethan and Edward rejoined their unit. Leon had expected Thomas to say a few more words. Instead, the other side just smiled and said to him, Leon, I've returned your men, and I'm in a hurry to start a big meeting, so I'll be off. Leon's expression finally eased. After Thomas's car left, many redirected their gaze back to me. Leon cleared his throat. The results of this exercise are probably known to all, we, the Red Army, won. Thunderous applause erupted from below. Leon looked satisfied at everyone performed well in this exercise. But he also highlighted some issues succinctly, asking every unit to carefully review these issues based on today's problems after returning. Finally, his gaze fell on me. Ethan, how do you feel about your performance this time? Report, Commander, my performance was mediocre. Leon paused, then with a half-smile, replied, no need to be too modest, eliminating the commander with a single shot deserves everyone's praise. When the crowd gathered to enjoy the spectacle heard this, they got goosebumps. Someone began clapping first, followed immediately by everyone else clapping wildly, all eyes eagerly on me. However, I responded, report, there were still shortcomings in my performance, it could have been more efficient. At the start of the competition, I didn't carry a gun, and later, I forgot to ask for grenades from the ambush squad, which could have ended the exercise earlier. Wait a minute. He didn't have a gun at the start of the competition? Then what was that slung around his neck? He was clearly speaking the language of Azura country, but isn't that a bit too Versailles? Commander Leon's face darkened. Where was your gun at the beginning? The gun had issues, it wasn't stable, I wanted to change it, but the replacement never arrived before the competition started. Everyone was completely flabbergasted this time. What kind of hellish start was that? And he still managed to perform outstandingly. Someone couldn't help but ask, so, you just survived till the end with 2 grenades? Actually, 4 grenades. Edward and I had 2 each. Everyone was speechless, looking skyward. How are we supposed to respond to that? Commander Leon finally realized something was off. He glanced at my gun and then at others. The same exercise, all Red Army personnel, yet the gun models were markedly different. Leon whispered something to someone next to him, who then furrowed his brow and left. Leon then announced that everyone could rest well tonight and that the cafeteria would host a victory banquet. Tomorrow morning, each military group's personnel will return to their camps. You are dismissed for now. Lastly, Ethan, come with me. I followed a stern-faced Leon to his office. Sitting on the sofa, I said directly, Commander. Leon went straight to the point, I know your previous identity wasn't simple. What's your real purpose in joining the army? I paused, then seriously said, to serve the country, of course. In my heart, the status of Azura country is the highest. I nodded, I know. Leon sipped his tea with a smirk, you're definitely going to apply. I firmly said, I will apply, and I don't need any favors. I'll pass the selection fair and square. You're a walking cheat code, what does fair and square mean to you? You say that, but I don't understand. I believe everyone's strength is self-made. There's nothing wrong with a selection. Leon thought to himself, you're still playing coy with me, okay, I get it. But be careful, your spectacular emergence in the military exercise will have put you under many watchful eyes. I'm curious how you'll handle what comes next. After all, the business of reborn is still taking orders. Leon gave me a knowing smile, although he valued talent, Ethan's unique status meant he had to be closely monitored. After leaving Leon's office, I realized I had forgotten to cancel my mercenary business orders. Not canceling the orders would surely keep people looking for me, with both the military and police keeping close tabs. How could I forget such a thing in my haste? Being in the ordering state but not replying to messages could easily drop my ranking. During the evening bonfire, members of the scout unit gathered to chat and share stories. A usually aloof individual said generously, when I was in school, I had a hero complex. I couldn't help but step in whenever I saw injustices, which eventually got me hospitalized after a beating. The statement elicited roaring laughter. He wasn't upset and continued cheerfully, later, my family was worried I'd end up seriously hurt or worse, so they sent me to the army. People joked, you call yourself a hero? Weren't you eliminated on the first morning? Some hero, getting knocked out right at the start. You're definitely a hero in the enemy's eyes, going down after just one hit, feeling so accomplished. Everyone laughed heartily. When it was Edward's turn, he said somewhat embarrassedly, I heard that if you don't serve as a soldier, you regret it for a lifetime, but if you do, you only regret it for 2 years. Everyone immediately felt stirred by his words. But I seriously turned to him and asked, if you joined the special forces, would you think about going back to school after 2 years? This question caught Edward off guard. I haven't really thought about that. Although I want to be a special forces member and will definitely apply, I always feel like I'm not strong enough. James immediately became indignant. Edward, that's maddening to hear. You, always ranking among the top in overall performance, say you're not strong enough. Does that mean the rest of us shouldn't even bother applying? Edward blushed with embarrassment. I said firmly, you really need to think about this seriously. Your goals need to be firm, if they're not, you'll lack motivation. Suddenly, a dark-skinned soldier with small eyes stood up. I joined the army because I was bullied for years. Everyone looked at his muscular build, finding it hard to imagine him being bullied. He continued, my family was relocated, and after the relocation, a private school was built where I was enrolled. The bullying wasn't physical or verbal, it was being ignored in those disdainful glances. I'm a cheerful person, but I was utterly friendless there. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore, had a huge argument with my dad, and dropped out of school. Just then, I saw a veteran with a big red flower on his uniform passing by my house. Everyone applauded him warmly. That moment, I decided I wanted to be a soldier. Another guy, who looked scholarly and refined, said, I'm a military enthusiast. My dream was to join the Air Force and fly fighter jets. But I didn't meet some of the criteria initially, so I couldn't join the Air Force. Still, I feel that any military role is impactful, and I hope to stay in the forces for life. His name is Anthony Lewis, he even had LASIK surgery to qualify for military service. Listening to everyone's stories, it seemed as though I could see everyone's past lives. While everyone had different reasons for joining the army, we were brought together here by fate and dreams. Dropping our previous rivalries, today we seemed to grow closer to each other's hearts. Finally, it was my turn. Someone cheered, Ethan, with your skills, you must have trained for a reason at home, right? I thought for a moment, aside from hoping for world peace, there are specific reasons, but I can't really talk about them. After all, revealing them might scare everyone half to death. After witnessing countless war-torn scenes, I've come to appreciate how fortunate Azura country is, free from war and turmoil, thanks to the relentless efforts of its military. It's not like I can just say, I hope to openly help Azura country, not through covert operations. The next day, we all returned to our bases. Martin pulled me aside for a chat, you need to keep a low profile, we're all aware of your past deeds. I continued to play dumb. Martin rolled his eyes in exasperation. In the days leading up to the Special Forces selection, many followed me to increase their training intensity. Besides training troops, I also connected with former comrades from the recruit class. David, Miles, and Henry, among others, all wanted to try out for the Special Forces. But since the daytime schedule was fixed, I could only use the evenings to train them collectively. As a result, David was criticized by his artillery battalion commander for looking like a zombie every day. David, you're turning into a night owl, huh? Isn't the daytime training intense enough for you? If you don't make it into the Special Forces this year, all those early mornings and late nights will have been for nothing. David, sleepy and disoriented, took a moment to catch on. The other person was being sarcastically critical, even squinting and yawning as he spoke. Well then, I'll take that as a good omen from the commander. The commander could only reply, lucky me. The number of enlistees from the reconnaissance unit this year was unprecedentedly high. Even Martin was stunned to see the thick stack of applications. This year, the number of applications could set a world record, Martin remarked, though he was pleased to see such courage and confidence among the applicants. A week before the actual selection, Leon gathered all the applicants to explain this year's selection exercises, starting with an intelligence test. Several academically weaker individuals immediately frowned, lamenting, that's it, I'm done for. Just seeing a lot of text makes me sweat. Martin reassured them, the format changes annually, but don't worry, it's not overly difficult. The less reassured they felt, the more Martin insisted, really, it's not that bad. He then highlighted other aspects of the selection, many of which were physically demanding, including a wilderness survival component. Special Forces isn't just about individual performance. Many tests will assess the coordination between partners, and since you've not had professional training, it won't be too hard. This gave everyone a basic idea of what the competition would involve, though it did little to alleviate their anxiety. Seeing the heavy expressions around him, Martin decided to lighten the mood. Now, for a little surprise. Inside this box are 30 balls, each containing a piece of paper. Whoever finds the paper with a treasure character will get the only direct entry spot available in the reconnaissance unit. At this announcement, the room erupted in excitement. Really? I need to pray to my ancestors to bless me with that entry spot, one person declared, half-jokingly. Others thought about their chances, I've been saving up all my luck for 20 years with hardly a second bottle of iced tea. I need to use all that luck now. I couldn't help but smile, surprised Martin hadn't chosen someone yet and had resorted to such a method. Don't get too excited. This spot doesn't guarantee you'll make it into the Special Forces, it just means you skip the selection. You'll still have to train as usual. Soon, everyone was drawing balls from the box. When it was my turn, Martin grunted, perhaps a bit peeved. People started voicing their disbelief as they opened their balls and found no treasure. Oh my god, I was so sincere, and still nothing. Neither did I. Let's see who got it, if anyone. If it's him, we're just here to make up the numbers. We can't match his skill, and now it seems not even his luck. Attention turned to me, holding the last unopened ball. If it was him, we'd feel they were just extras. It's down to this? Our luck and efforts don't compare? I opened the ball under everyone's watchful eyes, and sure enough, the paper inside bore the character. Disbelief and dismay filled the room. Is there no justice? What's the point of trying now? Holding the ball, I was speechless. Martin couldn't contain his amusement. Ethan, seems like destiny really wants you to have this spot. I paused, then suggested, maybe we should draw again. Martin with a puzzled face. You'd give up a sure thing? If it were me, I'd sleep with this ball tonight. But I prefer the challenge of selection. I'm sure it's going to be exciting, and I want to experience that. Silence fell. Was this how the strong-minded thought? Incomprehensible to most. Seeing through my intentions, Martin knew I didn't need the spot and decided to indulge my whims by drawing again. This time, Anthony, the guy who wanted to be a pilot and had LASIK for it, won. As he became nervous, he subconsciously pushed up the glasses he wasn't actually wearing. His neck turned pink with excitement. I really didn't expect to be the one to draw it. I guess I'm pretty lucky. Then he bowed deeply to me, saying, "Thank you for giving me this opportunity." I waved it off. "No need to thank me. I hope you make it to the end." Anthony gave a shy smile. "Don't worry, I'll give it my all in the coming weeks." A few days later, on the day before the Special Forces selection, everyone started packing their gear. Kevin kissed a pendant, then clutched it in his hand, closing his eyes in a moment of sincere prayer. I approached and asked, "Does that necklace have a special meaning?" Kevin laughed sheepishly. "Sorry, my mom got this for me at a temple before I joined the army. She said it would keep me healthy." I could tell he was a bit nervous. His hands were slightly trembling as he packed his backpack. The next morning, everyone packed their bags and boarded the coach bus, with over 30 people settling in. But less than half an hour into the journey, the bus suddenly stopped. What's going on? Aren't we supposed to be on a 3 or 4 hour ride to the selection site? Is this some kind of test? Are they testing us this early? Edward, nervously clutching my clothing, asked, "Are they not following the usual procedures? Has the selection started already?" I remained unusually calm. To be exact, the test began the moment we boarded the bus. Suddenly, a few men with fierce looks came up. One of them had a long scar like a centipede on his hand. "Everyone off now. There are 5 vehicles down there, 6 people to a vehicle, get on one." Everyone looked at the 5 vehicles below, which were quite varied. There were vans, pickups, electric tricycles, and box trucks. "Can we choose ourselves?" someone asked. The man smirked and said, "Yes, choose for yourselves." Hearing that we could choose, everyone immediately crowded around me. "Which vehicle are you taking?" "I'll go with you. Don't leave me behind." Everyone eagerly chose to be with me. I picked the pickup truck, and others followed me into the truck bed. Those who were left quickly paired with others they were close to. Once everyone had chosen their groups, the man with the centipede scar shuffled 2 people from each vehicle and mixed them into other vehicles. The next second, he threw me into the electric tricycle, already cramped with 4 backpacked men squeezed into the narrow space. The men shuffled around hurriedly to make room for me. I didn't know these few very well, and I had to admire the centipede-scarred man's observation skills. Few words were exchanged in the vehicle, likely due to the intimidating aura I carried. The electric tricycle seemed underpowered, and the tires were barely holding up. With several of us on board, they visibly deflated. An unsmiling man in civilian clothes drove the electric tricycle. As they faced the cold wind head-on, the ride felt colder inside than out. The convoy of vehicles set off. Our open-air electric tricycle lagged behind from the start. We followed until the sun set before finally seeing the outskirts of the city. Everyone, starving and restless, asked, "What are we eating tonight? Where are we sleeping?" The driver nonchalantly responded, "I don't know." The group's frustration was palpable. "You brought us here, and you don't know?" I realized this might also be part of the test. "Can we leave?" The driver said, "I don't care, but you have to keep this watch on, so I can contact you anytime." The other 4 looked at the watch suspiciously, feeling like they were being messed with. But I asked, "When will you contact us tomorrow?" "Approximately where?" The man smirked, "Don't know." I nodded, "Then I'm leaving." The other 4, frustrated and gritting their teeth, demanded, "Where are you going?" Of course, to find a place to eat and sleep. One of them skeptically asked, "What if we wander off, and he asks us to travel a long distance back here tomorrow? What then?" I pointed to our surroundings. "If you want to sleep here, that's fine, but I'm not staying." Then I simply shouldered my bag and walked away. The others hesitated, feeling that although I was capable and impressive, they weren't familiar enough with me to ask me to take them alone. After much deliberation, they too decided to set out on their own. After everyone had left, the man with the centipede scar on his hand spoke into his radio. "This is Centipede, reporting that the 5 targets have departed. Tracking is now activated." The response came through the radio immediately. "Receive the location of the 5, sharing real-time updates to your phone. The first task will be issued at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning."